Um, I'd like to call the special meeting of the Brattleboro Selectboard to order for Tuesday, May 26th. And by all indications, we have a properly warned meeting. Peter?
Yes, we do.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Typically, we go into chair's remarks, and I think I'll save all my remarks until our topics come up. And so I'll send it over. I just want to check in with Peter because I wasn't quite sure if you wanted to give any comments before we get started.
I'll save mine also for the substantive items on tonight's agenda. Thank you.
Sounds good. Forgive me while I tweak my microphone a little bit. So any other select board members like to make any committee reports or comments? Getting head shakes. All right. Next is public participation. This would be a quick 2 or 3 minute opportunity to chime in, everyone. If there's anything that's not on the agenda that you would like to share, community announcements, comments, questions for the board. And typically what I ask, we have one response, and that's from Ricky Rosati. So I'll just ask Patrick to bring up Ricky's audio, and Ricky, you're welcome to share your camera as well. And if you don't mind, just keep within a 2 or 3 minute period because we have lots of business to attend to later. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Can hear you.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, we can hear you.
Great. This is my first successful go-to meeting. And I was just wondering if the go-to meeting links could also be listed on the municipal event calendar so that people may have an easier time accessing it.
I was having trouble understanding that, but I see some head nods. Would somebody want to repeat that for me just so we all know?
Yes. Ricky asked that the meeting information be placed on the town calendar in case that encourages people to participate. Right, Ricky?
Okay, Peter, is that, you want to comment, please?
Yeah, the format in which the calendar is presented is like a calendar with the date boxes, and it's there's not enough room there to put all of the connecting information for these meetings into the calendar itself. But what we can do is put something in the calendar that'll refer people to the information. It's right actually at the top of the town's homepage for how to connect into select board meetings, and so we'll make sure that that's clear in the calendar to refer people back to the homepage.
Thanks, Peter. And I'm told that we do have a caller on the line, so in the absence of seeing anybody else chime in on chat, I'm going to ask the caller to go ahead and go off mute. Introduce yourself and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Summer. I'm from West Brattleboro, if you're referring to me.
Yes, Summer. Thank you. I never know who exactly it is, so it's always a surprise. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much.
How can we help you?
Oh, I was just attending the meeting to listen. I thought it was welcome to the public. If it's not, I'll click it off.
No, sorry. I made a mistake there. I kind of assumed I realized that you were here and you arrived at the perfect time to make a comment, so I sort of assumed you were also wanting to make a comment. My fault.
You're certainly welcome.
Yeah, I'm interested in like being caucused into the town rep thing, but I don't know that this year will work out because they canceled it. But I'm just interested in general because I love the town and I love politics.
Absolutely. Well, we're super happy you are interested in caucusing in. And while the word canceled has been used, that's simply because we have not yet been able to set a date certain. So cancellation right now is appropriate, but we certainly all hope we can hold representative town meeting pretty soon.
Tim, may I add something to that, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to add for the caller's benefit and for the general public's benefit that we're anticipating having some discussion about that at your meeting next week, 1 week from this evening. That'll be ultimately actually a decision for the chair and the vice chair when we go over the draft agenda tomorrow. But we have had prior discussions here with the board and in some of our communications with the community about having an update about some options that we're working on for how town meeting might be able to be held so that you can begin to decide the path forward on that. And that would be 1 week from tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in by phone there, Summit. And I think that's going to be it. I don't see anybody else raising their virtual hands. So appreciate everyone's patience with the technology. I think I'd like to just ask our town manager if you have anything pressing that you want to add to a town manager COVID-19 update. Otherwise, we'll just launch into the sole purpose of our COVID-19 update section.
Yeah, we'll have a more complete discussion of a variety of different COVID-19 issues next week, as we've been doing at your regular meetings. But for tonight, I think it's appropriate for you to move directly into the follow-up discussion on the resolution from last week.
Great, thank you. So our next item is to review our COVID-19 emergency order of wearing face coverings required in the town of Brattleboro. Last week there was a lot of discussion and some nice work done by everybody to get to a consensus on an order that our town manager had provided, sort of a distillation, if you don't mind me characterizing it like that, of some other towns' orders. It's fairly efficient and clear, and we all really appreciate that. But I felt it was really important to get some feedback because it happened very rapidly, and that's why everyone very kindly agreed to a special meeting tonight, not only to address that important action, but also some very important items that we weren't able to get to because of the late hour last time. So I'd like to just open it up, let some other folks talk first and stop talking myself, and see if you'd like to share some thoughts or reports from community members, etc. And I'll chime in either in the middle or towards the end. Anyone? We may have lost Ian. I don't see Ian.
Oh, yeah. There he is.
Oh, there he is.
I'm still here.
Okay. Brandy had her hand up.
There we go. The one piece of feedback I got that I thought was pretty valid was that when we changed the age to 5 and under instead of 2 and under, we still left the basically the do not put the mask on language in, and that might be, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think we were focused on doing the right thing, but it's still, now it sounds like you shouldn't put a mask on a child that's 5 and under. And I say, if you can, you can. So that was like the one piece of feedback I got that I thought was valid to hear about the actual drafting.
Yeah. Ian, do you have a comment on that specifically? Because I could chime in as well on that. Oh, I'll just chime in. Brandy, I had the same feeling. I think that could be avoided just by saying on children under the age of 5, they are not required, because it kept that little piece of what sounds like advice. And that certainly shouldn't be the case if you have an exceptionally tolerant 3-year-old or something like that, which obviously in Brandy and I's experience, that doesn't happen, but I'm sure there's some great kids out there who with the program. Ian?
Liz, after you.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to chime in and say that I got a lot of positive feedback and a lot of thank yous for the board's action last week.
Ian?
Yeah, I spoke to a number of business owners and employees in town, or tried to, because I feel like this order that we passed last week primarily involves them and customers. So, and I got a lot of positive feedback, like Liz. Couple of things that I'd bring to the board as suggestions that were brought to me that I wanted to share. One was the idea of having a date that we would look at the order and determine what we would do next. So I think this individual kind of felt like this is just like this unending idea, and it would maybe just be mentally better for everyone if there was like on July 15th, the select board is going to look at this order and decide if we're going to continue it or not. Kind of like the way the governor has done the state of emergency. So that was one suggestion. And then another one was that we don't really clarify in the order that the requirement for individuals who are employees to wear masks is not something that independently is coming from the board, but is something that is just in line with what the governor ordered, which was to have all employees wear masks or be behind face shields. From our order, it looks like they are both coming independently from Brattleboro. And that's all I have to share now, but I may have more to say later.
Great. Well, I'll just chime in, unless anyone's raising their hand furiously, and say that I do sort of agree on the date certain idea, or a sunset, etc. I think you said July 15th, right, Ian? But I think the governor's order goes to June 15th currently. Is that right?
I'm not sure.
Peter, do you remember?
I'm not certain of the date of the governor's most recent extension.
Yeah.
Keep on with your conversation and I'll go online and see if I can find out while we're talking.
Just to be clear, I just threw out a random date.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I actually, when you said that, I immediately thought of June 15th. So I think I'm right about that. But that would, that brings us to, obviously it's only 2 meetings away for us, but June 16th should be our date for our second meeting in June. And I'm just wondering if other board members would be amenable to have it line up with the state of emergency, because we already have language towards the effective period at the end in the resolution that keys it to the governor's declaring an end to the state emergency of COVID-19. I think that would give us an opportunity to examine it on a town level along with the state level. And obviously, if he extends his, we can just have it on the agenda for June 16th. Go look at it again. Daniel, you had your...
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to point out that there's an effective period on the order that's tied to the governor's declaration of a state of emergency. I see no real need to create some date different than that. I mean, I know that, as you just pointed out, that it's kind of June 15th. When we get to June 15th or just before, some decision will be made. It seems very unlikely to me that he'll say, no, it's all done on June 15th. I don't feel like a great urgency to be reviewing this order 2 weeks from now. In the week that's passed since we passed it, it took a minute for folks to adjust and be aware of it. But however I have been out in the world since then, I've seen a great deal of people wearing masks in stores and on their way to stores, and I guess what I'm saying is, like, I don't feel like we need to keep revisiting this every couple of weeks. I think it's a common sense order. I think the governor's state of emergency is a good marker for like when we should feel like we can chill about it. And until such a time, I'm not going to be pushing for anything sooner than, like at least a month from now.
Okay, well, let's continue with discussion on the order itself, and then maybe we'll land somewhere where it makes it clear that we'll come to a consensus on that point. Does anybody else want to chime in? Elizabeth? Liz?
No.
We do have Elizabeth interpreting for us.
No, I respond to either.
Ian, go ahead. Then I'll make some comments.
Yeah, probably just one other thing was we spent a long time talking last week about deciding to make this an order and not an ordinance, because the enforcement measure was not something that we could realistically, we didn't have ability to really enforce it. And so making it an ordinance was going to be empty. And I think there was a lot of positive discussion about why it was important not to do that. And so we passed an order instead. I think that it's been pretty clear to the board, based on communications that we've received from the public, that a lot of people don't understand the distinction. And I think, I don't really know what the resolution could be for that. If we want to put something in the order to talk about how it doesn't have an enforcement mechanism. But if we need to educate the public somehow, or else we're just going to continue to receive notices from people that we really can't do anything about.
Thanks, Ian. Some of my issues with the order as it currently sits are similar to Ian's, because I found a lot of people have some confusion about the enforcement mechanism. And the second question I get after I inform them that really there is no enforcement behind the order is, well, then why do we have an order? And I'm a little bit, I'm listening to those voices thinking that, and I have to sort of do a mea culpa here. When we were at our last meeting, I was hoping to encourage the board to do something more like a proclamation or a guidance, or something that did not imply that there was enforcement behind it, or going to be any kind of masked police roaming the town of Brattleboro. What happened, I think, was, first of all, it's very difficult sometimes to be a chair that's trying to get everybody to speak fairly and with a fair amount of public participation, which we had last time. And also, once it was presented, I realized in retrospect that once it was presented, the resolution as presented, as put together nicely and very skillfully by our town manager, it kind of turned the conversation into that discussion of that document versus talking that aspect of it out, meaning the aspect of looking for something that perhaps wasn't implying there was some rule of law behind it when in fact there wasn't. I'd also like to be the voice, because so far no one has sort of expressed this on the board. I'd like to be the voice for those citizens who are a little disturbed by the town of Brattleboro making something like this and telling people, rather than clear communication and a guidance. You know, it's all about semantics, and I think all 5 of us here, and more than 5, when you think about it, want people to wear masks when they can, when they can't socially distance or spatially distance, as I prefer to call it, because the available evidence, and it's all over the place still with COVID-19, but the available good evidence is that it does help protect people. We don't know how much, but it could be a fair amount, according to some studies. So I think it's good to go with that strong recommendation. I think it's good to go with that strong guidance. But there are some folks in our community, and I've heard from them, and I think I've heard from them more than any other board member at this point, from one-on-one conversations I've had, who are more than a little disturbed that the town of Brattleboro is telling people that they must wear masks within buildings that are not owned by the town of Brattleboro, or they're not employees of the town of Brattleboro. They're just businesses within the confines of Brattleboro. So, you know, my attitude is that the goal is to get, I don't want to say compliance either, I want to say more participation in mask wearing, and I think that should be everyone's goal here. How we get there is going to be messy. It's already messy, as we can see from these couple of meetings. I would have preferred to take a carrot route versus a stick route from the get-go, and I apologize to everybody who would have had me advocate for that a little bit more, and that's kind of like, I'm apologizing to myself there, because I really wanted to make the space to do that last time in the last meeting. So anyway, I'm trying to do that a little bit now, voicing some concerns that people have. And I want to ask the rest of the board, and this, hopefully it's not going to be taken as a provocative question. If we're passing something that is implying that there's going to be some penalty for not doing it, why would we do that versus a very clear, a very well-communicated proclamation, or the term I came up with is a emergency health guidance from the Brattleboro Selectboard. So I think it's, I think to people who want to encourage mask use, I'm wondering if that doesn't have the same encouraging effect as putting up something that often gets called an order, sometimes gets called an ordinance by mistake, and we know that it's not an ordinance. But with it comes this implication that there's going to be some sort of enforcement on some level, because and I know you all have too, at least to some extent, you've received some communications, because we were all CC'd on it, where people were just saying, well, here's somebody who's not doing what they're supposed to be doing within the town of Brattleboro, who's going to be enforcing this. So again, I think we all want the same thing. We want people to wear masks whenever they can and whenever they're close to other people. So I want to just throw that out there and take comments. And then after the board throws out a few words, I'll open up the public, invite the public to speak. Daniel.
I guess, seeing as we're clarifying where we would have liked to have been last week, I just want to clarify that I would have liked to have been the opposite end of there with an enforceable ordinance. It wasn't going to pass, so you know, that's just how it went that night. I would like, you know, I understand that like blanket 100% enforcement is probably unrealistic, but I would like any kind of order that we deem to be serious to also have some teeth to it. You know, the plastic bag ban is something that has been successful in our community, in part because it was required, but it also like became culturally just kind of the norm, right? And I think what I've seen recently, you know, even before this order, is there is a norm amongst a significant part of our population that you will wear a mask inside. And we're saying that we take the health of our town seriously enough that we believe it's important that as many people as possible comply with this. There are always going to be some people that don't comply with our laws, you know, and hopefully we won't have to do too much enforcement. If we could have passed an ordinance last week, I would have been all for it, but we passed an order and I'm okay with it. I think that the pros outweigh the cons, and I'm okay with that. And I am up for re-election next March. So there we have it.
I'm really tempted to just get a little bit of a clarification. Do you mind, Daniel?
Sure.
If you wanted an ordinance last week, and I understand we always try to find that spot where we can, where you can get 3 votes or indeed a unanimous vote. But how do you mean enforced ordinance? I mean, how on a practical level, how on earth would we do that as a town?
Well, I mean, that's a question for us to work out in terms of like our town operations, and I don't pretend to, you know every single in and out of our town operations. We have all kinds of laws in town that can only be enforced if someone is caught breaking them, right? And we have a limited number of police officers who might catch you breaking a law. I would see it in much the same way with masks. So if there was somebody trying to enter a business without wearing a mask, they kicked up a fuss about it, I would prefer that the person would see reason and, you know, simply either put the mask on if they had it, or if not go into the store. But if needs be, you know, then I would like to think that the business owner or whomever was supported by the town in, you know, having that person. I mean, you know, I'm not trying to police this mask use question. I just think that the seriousness of what the order was about should also have some way of people being able to enforce it if needs be. I would like to think that like 99% of the time people are just going to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And I think that is what most people do. And every now and then it doesn't happen. And, you know, having the backup of our police department if needs be, or some other, you know, less heavy-handed approach would be nice, I think, for folks. I haven't heard any feedback from businesses that they struggled with getting people to comply with the order this week. So that's where I'm at with it.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna try not to get into a back and forth just now. Brandy had her hand up a little earlier.
Yeah, to me, whenever we put anything out from the town, we always get somebody coming to us when people were, you know, when stores like weren't using paper bags and there was a few that were still using plastic. We were getting kind of tattling emails about that. We were getting them about panhandling. We're always, anytime we do something, we're always going to get these emails. To me, they're generally, in my experience, from the same people. Maybe a couple shake it up, a couple outliers here and there, but it's generally the same people that have strong feelings about people not following things that we put out. And it's generally the same people that have strong feelings about us putting things out. And so I just assume that whenever we do stuff like this, we're going to get feedback from both sides. It's my job as an individual board member and our job as a board member to still do what we think is right. I think putting the order out was right. I have no problem with the word guidance. Maybe that's my banking. I happen to like the word guidance. I think it's a strong word, guidance with a capital G, but really that's semantics to me. And I'm confused about people's confusion about the enforcement, because I think we made it pretty clear during the lengthy meeting, and most people who asked in public forums on Facebook, is this enforceable? We all gave the same answer. And so the fact that there's confusion about whether or not it's enforceable, or that the language left it open to enforceability interpretations, doesn't seem true to me. It seems to me like we clarified it pretty well, that it wasn't going to be, that we weren't going to have police enforcement. We talked about it online. And yeah, for me, it's the same people always. And their feelings are valid, but I have to kind of balance hearing that same kind of feedback about everything that we've done since I've been on the board that's come out in an authoritarian manner, with what I think is the health of every single citizen in our town.
Okay. Anyone else? Liz?
Well, I just come from the perspective of health, safety, and welfare. I mean, it's not just health, it's the whole range, health, safety, and welfare, which is where we get our power to regulate anything. So I worry about changing the wording because it will be viewed as a dilution of the original order. And the fact that it can't be enforced and it's not going to be enforced, I just see it as a quirk of what was passed last week. But I think if we water it down now, it'll be a sign of, I don't know, weakness, because we all really feel that people should be wearing masks, and we all feel that we have the authority to do that as part of the health, safety, and welfare. So I would I would need a really good reason to have to go backwards on this order.
And Liz, when you say backwards, you mean replacing,
yeah,
for instance, the word order with health guidance or anything like that?
Yeah, I just think whatever clarification we would make, we really have to think hard about it before everybody says, oh, well, they didn't really mean it. And we did mean it. So let's, we can be more careful with our language if it's appropriate, but I wouldn't want to give the impression that the board has any less resolve in our desire to have people wear masks. And the purpose was to help the shopkeepers. And I believe that would still be our purpose.
Mm-hmm. Ian?
Yeah, I think well put, Brandy. Yeah, I think I echo that. I think we made it very clear, and we spent a long time working on it. And Liz, I think I am in agreement with you too. Daniel, I'm a little frustrated. I wish that I don't really feel like that feeling was communicated last week. And I think that we could have had that conversation about an ordinance more thoroughly, and it would have maybe been a more productive time to do it then, before we pass something, than now after we've passed something. And I understand that you wanted to do something, but I do feel that way a little.
Let me just respond to that. I'm happy with what we did last week. I was really pleased with the way in which we came together, and I wanted to be on the same page. I didn't want something like this to be like a 3-2 win, so I was happy where we ended up. I just wanted to be real about, Tim kind of framed this as sort of maybe wishing that it had been something slightly different. So I just wanted to be honest with you all about how I, in a perfect world, would have had it, but that's not how this works. And I was really happy to find a place of consensus around this.
I appreciate that. And I'm not trying to be combative or anything. It's a tough issue. So, yeah. And I'm excited to hear what the public has to say. That's really.
Oh, good segue. Because I was just feeling like that we should hear from the public, and maybe, just to be fair, try to return to those few tweaking points that we can all agree on. Maybe we have a few that we can all agree on, it sounded like earlier. So if that's okay with everybody, I'll throw it out to the public. I want to just remind everybody on chat, please just give me your name and that you'd like to say something. If you start to say your point of view, because of open meeting laws, I feel like I either have to just repeat them out loud, and it's unclear whether to me whether you'd like to do that. It's also very tough for me to get a perfect picture of who exactly is saying what things. And certainly, whatever you do, please don't private chat to me with views or opinions. Just to all, just say your name, and I'm going to go through our list right now. First up, we had, oops, wait a minute. We had somebody who has just put their hand down. And I think Wendy Levy is the next up who would like to ask a question about enforcement mechanisms. Wendy, are you online still?
Yeah, I just unmuted myself. My question was already answered when Ian was speaking before, and also by the rest of you. But now that I have the mic, I would like it if you could remind us, maybe closer to the beginning of the meeting, how public participation works, because some of us can't be here every week. So, we forget.
Great. I thought I did that, but you know what? It might have been last week. That's how it's been going these days.
Okay.
So I apologize.
Okay, I just wanted to give you a reminder. I understand that This is all really weird and we're all getting used to it, but so are we over in the audience too. And yeah, we want to participate in a way that satisfies open meeting law.
Absolutely. And I think what I remember doing was typing my overly wordy reminder in the chat, but not out loud to everyone.
Okay.
So
well, anyway, thank you. I'm done. Thanks.
Thanks, Wendy. Everybody's waiting. And I also have somebody named Mike who might want to ask a question, but I don't know. I don't have a last name or anything. So I'm going to give the opportunity for Mike to turn on a camera, open up a microphone, if they'd like to.
Actually, sorry, that was me, Marta.
Oh. Marta.
Yeah.
Can you tell us your name, your full name, and where you're from?
Marta Gossage. I live on Elliott Street.
Thanks, Marta.
And I just wanted to say, I think, I absolutely understand that enforcement is, I don't even understand how that would work. But if anybody's been on Front Porch Forum this week, there's been a lot of talk there about people not wearing masks, not respecting distancing, not respecting the one-ways of the aisles, and a number of folks had petitioned to the Hannaford manager asking him to do that and suggesting some things, like perhaps having some disposable masks to hand out on the way in or things like that. And he, it seems fairly rudely, said, I'm not doing any of that. And so an awful lot of folks feel really unsafe shopping. And I had a similar experience when I went to Walgreens a couple days ago, where I was putting on my mask, outside the entrance before I went in, and a gentleman who wasn't wearing a mask kind of purposely coughed in my direction and got close in the store while we were, like kind of a show of like, you're so scared or whatever. And I just had my last chemo treatment last week. I have no immune system. This type of thing really is going to impact whether I can go shopping or pick up prescriptions or that kind of thing. So, it feels like more and more people are thinking that this is a big nothing burger, and particularly like the manager at Hannaford's really upset people by just not caring. So is there any medium thing we can do other than, I mean, obviously I don't think police enforcement is the way, but to make elderly and those who are at risk feel comfortable going out in public for the next foreseeable future in our town?
Would someone like to respond to that? Or I'll just throw out and say, I'm sorry those things happened to you. I personally was surprised, and again, I hate to make any assumptions based on an anecdote, and no offense, because things travel through the social media and sometimes you just don't know the ultimate source, so it can be unfair for people to assume something happened when maybe it didn't happen. My personal experience with Hanford is a lot of people are now covering their face, and I was there during a very busy time, sort of unexpectedly, and I was in and out pretty quickly, but I saw probably 100 people with maybe 3 that weren't wearing a face covering, and I was pretty impressed with everybody's commitment to a good idea for our community. So again, if anybody else wants to chime in on what Martha said. Daniel.
You know, last week after we issued this order, I was really thinking about the grocery stores. You know, those are the places where you have large numbers of people and folks need to go to the grocery store. And so it seemed to me that those were going to be potential flashpoints. I suggested that we reach out to those grocery stores, and I believe that happened. I think that in the absence of like enforcement on an individual basis, the only way to do this is through relationships and education, right? So like, this is a small town. We know each other. We care about each other. We can go and talk with the managers at these stores if it is indeed, a manager that says, we will not do this. Hannaford's is part of a regional chain. I'm sure that their, kind of infrastructure has lawyers in it and guidance on what is, advisable and what is not advisable. I think that we can do this simply by talking to each other rather than having to issue tickets. I guess when I was speaking in favor of enforcement, that's really like in the extreme circumstance. I think that there are many opportunities in much the same way that our police force already work, to have conversations right up until a point where a conversation is no longer useful. But we should be trying to have those conversations all along the way. So, anecdotes are not really helpful in terms of like us being able to base policy on them, but they are people's experiences, right? And like, I wanted to check out the situation because I'd had 2 people talk to me about that particular store. So I went to that store today. Admittedly, it was the middle of the day, but it was somewhat busy. And my experience at that time was out of about 50 people, 3 were not wearing masks. All staff, all various different levels of staff had all manner of PPE on. And then out of the 50 or so customers that I saw, only 3 didn't. On the front door, they had signs saying, the sign characterized it as an ordinance, but it said the town of Brattleboro requires this to happen. I think that we can do this with conversations first, and I'd be curious to hear what Peter found out last week when he spoke with those folks.
Oh, Peter's being queried. Go ahead.
Daniel, if it's all right, what I'd like to do is give a little more complete explanation of what enforcement would look like, since this is not in any way, shape, or form a criminal matter. I think that would help people understand why the enforcement conversation is, at least from my perspective, it's more of a distraction than it is the substance of the matter, the essential substance of the matter. I'd like to speak to that rather than my individual interactions with individual people. I would overall characterize my interaction with the managers at the grocery stores as having varied from concerned and cooperative to somewhat resistant. And so it, it wasn't entirely a positive experience. But I have had the same experience that two of you have already described at that particular establishment. And I've heard of similar experiences at the one other very large grocery store in town. So, and then, at the other two locations, there's actually some pretty clear procedures in place that were in place institutionally before the town took the action. So my take on it is this: I want everyone to understand about the fact that this would be a civil ordinance. This would be a town rule as opposed to a law of the state that where a violation is any kind of a criminal act. So you're right, Daniel, in what you described in terms of how the police department attempts to do community policing with, differentiating very clearly between people who need help, people who are making bad decisions, and people who are harming others, right? And this one's tricky because of the sense that we have that at least some of the non-compliant individuals, through carelessness at least, might be harming others. And that's what drives the whole discussion, and I think was the motivation for your action last week. The protection of the greater group being the purpose of the act. But because it's not in any manner a criminal matter, because it would have been, had you adopted an emergency ordinance, it would have been a civil ordinance. The enforcement of it would have required, under Vermont state law, warnings and education and, sort of cajoling to comply. And then in the failure to, repeated failure to comply, we could write a ticket. You could still do that if you chose, but I would suggest to you that that doesn't really get to the nub of the matter in a situation where it's about sort of the immediate need to protect one another in a public health emergency. And so we were, I think, very explicit during the discussion last week about, the fact that this would be, enforcement of this would be problematic, and that the intent would be to enable the store owners to say to someone who was a visitor, you need to put a mask on, the town requires that, right? And I don't know if any of you foresaw this. I didn't foresee a situation where there would be a business operator who might, for whatever reason, decide that it was, they weren't going to require that of people visiting the business, even though the town had taken this action. We've encountered a few instances of that, but it seems to me that in just the few instances of that, there is good that has come of this, that is useful, that is, in fact, what you intended. And I don't have an opinion about how you might change it. You can go whichever way the group of you is most comfortable in terms of how you change it. But on the specific question of enforcement, I think that we calibrated that correctly under the totality of these circumstances. And I think that people who know that there are certain establishments that are not being rigorous about requiring customers to wear masks can choose not to go to those businesses.
Thanks, Peter. Certainly we have a fair amount of grocery store options, some of which are very insistent on all customers wearing masks, and from what I've heard, a couple who are not quite as insistent. Daniel?
I really appreciate Peter's perspective there. And up until the end, I was like, yes, I'm totally with you. And then at the end, the grocery store piece, some people go to the grocery store because it's the one they can afford to go to, or they feel that they can afford to go to it. And, so if we were to have one grocery store in town where the management in the grocery store, and I don't even know if this is true, right? But say if the management said, we will not comply with this, I feel like that would be something that we would need to at least have a conversation with them about and see if we can get them to a place where they saw that it was worth complying with for the sake of their customers. Because, with some things, we can choose to shop here or shop there. And, when it comes to whether we can afford it, we don't have as many choices.
I think having a conversation is always possible, but I wouldn't characterize that as enforcement. Probably similar to what happens in any kind of alleged violation of the governor's order. usually a conversation happens. And then it falls to the state if they want to enforce something. That, say, if a restaurant is not following the governor's guidelines, they have the bigger sticks, and that's where it goes. Just to remind everybody, we are actually in public participation, although we're kicking around a little bit on the board, and I wanted to get it to a couple of other people who did want to speak, and I know Franz Reichsman wanted to speak, and yes, you have, oh, someone's appearing, well, that's not Franz. So Franz, I think all you do is Patrick enables your camera to be seen if you want to be seen, and I think if you take yourself off mute, then we'll be able to see and hear you as well. Are you there?
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Yes, I am. Thanks, Tim. I don't care whether I'm on the screen or not, but are you hearing me okay?
We are.
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, I just would like to chime in with a couple of points that I feel are important. One is that the degree to which wearing a mask protects other people is very significant and may be determinative in what happens in the course of the epidemic as a whole. There are countries where the mask wearing was made mandatory very early on, and they have had very few cases, certainly compared to our country. They even have leadership, political leaders who made a point of being very visible about wearing their masks. And I don't know whether there are criminal penalties associated or not, but the point is it works and it protects people. And this is not a matter in which it should be up to the individual. It should not be a question of voluntary compliance, whether there should be a ticket or other associated penalties. I don't really want to go there, but I mean, it has to be, the town said so. They said you have to do this, and that's the answer. And, you know, if you go back in history, I don't know how many examples there are of when political structures have said, you can't do this for health reasons. I mean, go right back to Typhoid Mary, where Mary really wanted to work in restaurants. She was devoted to food service, and she killed a lot of people that way. And they told her you can't, and she moved, and she went to another state, and she changed her name, and they tracked her down every time and said, you can't do this. And we're basically in that situation with this, not so much on a one-to-one basis, but on a population basis, we definitely are. So I'm basically supporting what I heard Daniel and Liz say, which is, no, we should not weaken this. This is, you know, I'm not saying we need to go to some other level with it, but it has to be that people understand that this is what the town said you must do. And I guess that's it.
Thanks, Franz. I think I'll just point out that I don't think weakening is the proper term to use. It's more like, I think we're all concerned with effectively communicating it. And then the question of enforcement becomes an issue that bandies back and forth. But thanks for the comments and history around Typhoid Mary. Next, I'd like to see if Peter Fishcase would like to say something.
You know, there's Kate O'Connor and somebody named Elizabeth Clausen. Have you heard from them?
I have heard from Kate, and Kate's going to be after Fish. And Elizabeth, I haven't heard from. Yeah, let's let Peter speak.
All right. Thank you, guys. I think after last meeting, I think you know what my position is on this. I'm not in favor of changing any of the language. I think the document is good as is. Again, I think it falls back onto messaging and speaking to the science of it and exactly what wearing a mask is going to mean to people who walk into a store. And again, just again, pulling the burden off the shop owner that, you know, might have to carry that weight on their shoulders to say, this is coming from the town of Brattleboro. This is not for me. It provides that level of insulation. And I just feel as though as a town that we owe it to our shopkeepers to pull that load off their shoulders and just put it on ours. And by ours, I mean all of yours. But know that I support this decision. I supported it last week. I supported it this week. I emailed Peter earlier with some of the feedback that I've been getting on some of the straw polling. It really hasn't been an issue. The biggest overriding issue is the potential of there being an issue. And I know that, Marta told a story which was, nothing short of tragic. And I hate to see that kind of behavior earlier, but it just, unfortunately, that's just the humanity that we have to deal with. But again, if we just send a message, not change the message, I agree with Elizabeth and Daniel about not changing the message in last week's, what you guys passed last week. I think it was good language. I think it was concise. I think it just breaks down to perhaps some messaging, further messaging that shop owners could hang in their doors that's consistent throughout the town.
Thanks, Peter.
All right, thank you.
Well spoken. You should consider a career in radio.
Thanks. I'll think about it. I've got the face for it.
I think we have Kate O'Connor next, if Kate is ready.
Hello.
Hello, Kate.
Thanks for having this discussion again. I think it was or is helpful for people. One of the things I just want to say is that, there are mixed reviews. And what I would ask people is for a little bit of patience. That's not to say people shouldn't wear masks, but what I mean is in our sort of looking at what people are doing, especially from the business owner, and I'm not defending any business, so don't take it that way. But I think sometimes people feel, and it was sort of said earlier, that people doubt the confusion of people understanding what they're supposed to be doing. And what we don't see, we see what the town of Brattleboro is doing. If you're a retail shop or a restaurant or a lodging or anybody now, the guidance that is coming down from the state is really confusing. And it sort of drips and drips and drips and drips and drips. So there's a confusion level that's not necessarily caused by the town, but that is caused by the state. So, and I think it gets mixed in with this, the new order that you have to make people, everybody has to wear a mask when they go into a business. And I just want to put a counter to what Pete Case just said. And while a lot of people do like the safety of being able to say the town is making me tell you this, a lot of them, they still feel it's on them because they're actually the one that has to go up and speak to somebody and say, you can't come in here, you don't have a mask. And that is, we just have to realize that is anxiety provoking for some of our retailers. And I just want us to acknowledge it. I don't think there's really anything we can do about it. But if we can sort of, give some people the benefit of the doubt, and I know some people don't deserve the benefit of the doubt, but the ones that are really trying, I just hope we can have some patience with them. And one other thing that I just would love to point out, it's a little off topic, but it's the same thing. A lot of our business or retailers are not open, even though the governor told them they can be open. They are not open because of the rules that the state has told them they have to follow to open. So I think we'll see more, hopefully, the state will allow them to open in a larger way soon. And I think we'll find that we're going to have to educate those retailers or those business owners that haven't been allowed to open yet of this new guidance. So again, we'll have another rolling of, we have to be patient with people. But thank you for talking about it tonight. And if there's anything, the chamber is spending a lot of time trying to get people to wear masks. DBA, BDCC, and the chamber put a sign together. The hospital has a sign. So I think if we can all just push that message, that goes a long way too. So thank you.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Kate. And that was me that said that there might be, so I didn't believe that there was confusion. And Kate, the way that you just explained a different perspective really makes sense to me. That it's just all confusing, which makes everything a little confusing. And I really appreciate your perspective on that. I like the way you phrased it.
Yeah, and I know there's all kinds of merchant issues that are dealing with tiny shops and just the rules making regular business impossible for them or close to impossible. So we feel for them. And a lot of this is trying to figure out what you have some control over and what you don't have any control over. So seeing no other public participation at the moment, I just want to bring it back to the board. Daniel?
I was just going to say Elizabeth Clausen wanted to speak, and they've just put something.
Just came in. Sorry. And also I have Amanda Whitman. So Elizabeth, oh, there you are, upside down. Welcome.
I know. I had to do a trip to my doctor's this way, and we laughed about how I was upside down.
Okay.
Oh,
Liz is turning herself upside down.
I'm just concerned. I was concerned about the term enforcement. That troubles me. I like what Kate said about the retailers taking the brunt of various remarks, good or bad. There's a lot of confusion out there as to the business with a mask, and it doesn't protect you. You're hopefully protecting your neighbor, your friend, whomever. A lot of people don't understand that. The other thing that concerns me is this business of sanitizing doorknobs and everything else. So that does not affect any kind of virus. It's an antibacterial that we're using. I just want people to realize, you just be careful, take care of each other, and just do the best we can. But my main concern was the business of trying to enforce the mask. I feel as if we can request and the guidelines, but we got to be careful with this, enforcement business. We have to self-enforce, be self-respectful and responsible. That was it. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I think I'll just go right to Amanda Whitman, if you'd like to chime in now.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks.
I just want to say again how much I appreciate the thoughtful process and patient handling that you all are giving this topic. It's an important one, and I'm personally very grateful for that. I've been doing some work with Stephanie Bonin of the DBA supporting downtown businesses. And I just want to make sure everyone knows that we're keeping a list on brattleboro.com of the downtown shops and individual local makers who are selling or donating masks. I have seen some conversations, been part of some conversations with people who are concerned about mask access. Some of the people on this list, some of the makers will deliver, and some of them will provide masks for free. Oscar Heller and the Brattleboro Mutual Aid Society organized a free mask tree at Pliny Park recently. I believe that helping everyone access masks needs to be a community priority, and I know that's not the focus of this discussion, but I wanted to bring it up so that people were aware and mention that I'm aware of 6 downtown shops that have moved very quickly to make masks available for people to purchase when they're downtown. So if you see someone without a mask and you have a productive conversation with them, you could send them in the direction of any of these businesses. It's a short list: Bee's Nest, Mally Sun, Wyndham Flowers, Twice Upon a Time, Altiplano, and Turn It Up. So masks are available at cost and no cost and all around town if anyone has concerns about that. And that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Amanda. I think just to move us along, I'm going to ask one last person to chime in, and that would be Martha Ramsey. And then I'm going to bring it back to the board real quick. Hi, Martha.
Hi there. I'm sorry that I didn't hear the instructions on how to put up my hand. I guess I figured it out finally. And also, I'm not aware of the whole process that you guys went through to do the order, but I was very impressed by the order. I thought the language is really careful, it's clear, and it's a good thing to have in a town that's right at the intersection of, you know, the road from Boston and the road from New York City. So thank you so much for doing that, you guys. I just would like to ask, it does seem to me that in a situation also I'd like to speak in support of whoever it was, I can't remember who said that this is also, it's not so much about right now, or not just, but going forward. Like, let's say we have another round in the fall or at some point, and it comes through here, and it comes through quickly. And I happen to know, because I'm into history, that the Spanish flu in Vermont hit really bad and really fast. So that it's important that we not get too complacent about our location and our small population and all of that, which I'm sure all of you already know. But anyway, I wanted to ask because I agree that the expectation that the town officials would somehow punish, or could punish or ticket or quote unquote enforce a town order of this kind doesn't seem to make sense or even be workable, but that conversations are the way to go. And I would like to underline that by saying, yes, and let's have those conversations. Let's really have them. And so to ask who, if anyone, as part of the town, people responsible within the town structure, who will actually be having those conversations with those business owners who are, whether they're confused or they're recalcitrant, shall we say. So could you explain to me and us, how will those conversations take place if and when it's determined that they're necessary in some cases? And I'm asking this in the hope that looking at this would help going forward to where this may become a necessity. And just one last thing I want to mention, and that is, because I didn't hear your previous discussion about the order, but if we have people who are getting hostile about not wanting to wear masks, that's a little scary, not only if you're vulnerable, but also just in terms, as I know, I'm sure you already have thought about all this, but to second whatever thoughts you've had along these lines, it's clearly going to be a difficult line to walk because of the polarization and the volatility of the situation. And so I don't know, how do we walk that line where we are civil and conversing with people who are not willing to comply with safety measures, and then perhaps at some point to recognize that they are putting an entire community at risk by their refusal to comply.
Okay, Martha, do you mind if I?
Thank you. I'm finished. Thank you.
Boil that down. Thank you for the comments. I'll boil it down to two questions, and maybe I'll address the second one, which is slightly easier, and then I'll kick a quick comment over to our highly talented town manager who's really good at addressing difficult questions. But as far as hostility, I want to remind everybody that if something approaches violence or threats, that of course is not tolerated in Brattleboro. That's something that if it's within a place of business, those merchants should know that they can rely on the Brattleboro Police Department to not only make sure everybody's peaceful in their establishment temporarily, but to also, if necessary, issue a no trespass order. And that would exist regardless of whether there was an order in place or an ordinance or an order as such as we have now or any kind of guidance. So that's not going to change. And I'll kick over the question about who could speak to merchants if we have an especially egregious refusal or something. Over to Peter.
Thank you, Tim. So we can follow up, and I hear that there's a desire for us to follow up. I'm personally, at this moment, only aware of 2 businesses in town that there have been any complaints about. I haven't received directly, and I've received a fair amount of communication directly on this topic. I haven't received directly, nor have I been advised of complaints that you've received or other people in town have received, or Stephanie Bonin or Kate O'Connor, in the business community. I'm not aware of any other business besides 2 fairly large corporate, stores in our community that are present in our community as part of a very large corporate network of stores. And I will go and speak with them again, and I will try to be more compelling. I have to say, I tried to dance on this earlier because I'm really concerned about calling out any particular store. What I said earlier was true. I received varying responses from the visits I made. I've been trying to gauge, despite my discomfort with some of how that initial communication went, I've been trying to gauge how things are going out there by my observations and what I've heard from others. And what I have heard from others and seen myself is very consistent with what Daniel and Tim described earlier. The vast majority of people in a store that can accommodate, 100 or more customers at a time, the vast majority wearing masks, some not. And I don't know of any other place in town where this has been a problem to the point where people are calling out a store and saying, hey, at that place, they're not paying enough attention to it. So I want to be careful that we don't overly invest ourselves in trying to solve that last tiny bit of compliance that is a combination of business owner or manager behavior or decision-making and customer decision-making. And because we don't have a method for actually, honing in on just those few exceptions to correct the behavior, because it would be a matter of communication, I'm concerned that there's likely to be a minority, and I'm grateful that it appears to be a small minority of our population who is going to resist this as a matter of principle. And, with or without the assistance of store owners, I don't think we're going to achieve 100% compliance. I think what we need to be trying to do is, as a community, continue to push the message and continue to support the people who are working hard to achieve compliance. And, I'm willing to go talk to those 2 big stores again, but I would ask that people have low expectations that you're going to see that last, 1% of customers change their behavior.
Absolutely. I think that's reasonable, and I'm not sure you should interpret, unless we have a separate discussion about that, interpret the board wanting you to spend a large portion of your time re-speaking to establishments that may be recalcitrant. But I'm just throwing that out there from me. So I really would love to wrap this up soon. I'd like to just address really quickly a couple of things that it feels like just Ian and I had just some criticisms, and they're minor tweaks. Does everybody, do you want me to go through a couple of those, or Ian, do you want to help me out?
Well, I think after hearing from the board and from people, a lot of what I brought was things I heard from the community. So I'm happy we can talk about what I brought forth at the beginning of the meeting, but I'm really proud of the work we did last week, and it sounds like from the majority here, we're and from people who have spoken, that we're pretty comfortable with where it's at. But I defer to you, Mr. Chair.
Gee, thanks. Well, I want to just, I mean, obviously it would require us signing a slightly altered version, but I do have a concern about the lack of clarity around the small children issue, which I thought we had a consensus on, but maybe not. Peter?
Yeah, I thought you did too, and I took a moment during the discussion to actually amend that paragraph in the way that I think you'd want to, if you wanted to make it clear that you weren't telling small children or telling parents of small children not to put a mask on them.
Yeah.
So now or when you're ready, I could read that, and I think that'll address that. And then I didn't know whether there was anything else that the group of you would want to change about it, but I'm happy to help that too if there is.
Why don't you read that? We'll get that out of the way, and we'll just get head nods if we don't require a vote on that one.
Okay, so I believe that the exceptions paragraph should be changed to say this: cloth face coverings are not required on young children under age 5 and should not be placed on anyone who has trouble breathing or anyone who is unconscious, incapacitated, or otherwise unable to remove the mask without assistance.
I think that's important that we clean that up. Yeah, that sounds good. Because we don't want to make it sound like people shouldn't have masks on their kids. If they're lucky enough to have children that will wear them under 5, good for them. God bless them.
While we're talking about this, I did get a question of where the language came from for the unconscious part.
I wondered the same thing.
Yeah. So just while we're on it, I didn't really have an answer. I thought maybe it came from the CDC. But,
it came from the CDC.
It did, and that's why the thing that happened that got awkward was when we changed the age on it, because the CDC also does say do not place one on a child under 2. So the wording was right for the CDC, but then for good reasons we modified the age limit to age 5 and didn't pick up. I apologize for not noticing that this language that you're looking at tonight should have been modified last week.
Yeah.
But so the unconscious was that also came from the CDC. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
That absolutely.
It's fine. I mean,
It's weird.
It's
yeah.
Weird. So just something that bugs me, and I'm not getting, had two individual conversations about this, but if no one else is worried about the lack of addressing the very special circumstances around restaurants, I think someone said that it will be assumed that we're not asking people to wear a mask, then take a sip of a drink, and then put the mask back on, and then take a bite of your food, But if we indeed, Burlington did exempt restaurants, and that's probably why they did it, because it's just not reasonable to expect something like that. If you are comfortable with hearing a lot about that as they open up in an indoor situation,
Don't give me a kiss.
then I'm fine. If Daniel, if you're willing to, as you put it last time so eloquently, take the heat, or I forget exactly how you put it, but that one seems particularly messy to me. that's coming down the pike? Liz, thank you for someone raising it.
I was looking at the governor's order, I think it was the governor's order about restaurants. And, Kate is right in that there's a lot going on and it's confusing. But what we heard last week from Lita was, that she wanted people to wear masks when they come in to order. And the governor's order says you should order online, or maybe it was the CDC, you should order online or order in advance or order from a touchpad, blah, blah, blah. So that ordering component, while protecting the restaurant people, that's real. So I think we should, again, let that roll out to see how it works and to see if we need to tweak it. But I thought it was clear that the initial entrance of patrons in a restaurant should be wearing a mask.
Yep. My hand is always in the wrong spot.
I wasn't sure if it was Brandy or Daniel. Yeah, first. Fight it out.
Daniel.
Daniel.
I mean, when we wrote when Peter wrote this, and we adopted it last week, it was really in response to the opening of retail establishments. And in each sector-specific guidelines from the ACCD, there's a ton of stuff, right? But the governor's order that previous Friday said, with regards to face coverings, towns and cities can pass something stricter than what the state requires. So there are a ton of other guidelines that each kind of business or place has to take care of, and we're just addressing the face covering. I mean, it's tough to eat through a cloth mask. I'm going to trust the people on this. Maybe we don't need to put it in there, but I'm also open to if we get to a place where restaurants are struggling with this, then sure, we need to clarify. But I think common sense should prevail.
Yeah, I like to just leave it alone for now, because I definitely, I went to the Whetstone this past weekend and we kept our masks on when we got there. We kept them on in that little narrow stairwell as you go to upstairs, and we put them back on and anytime a server came or somebody came within a 10-foot bubble, and otherwise we kept them off.
Fair enough. So the other issues, I think we've talked out. I mean, Ian and I both mentioned the idea of sunsetting. It does mention this order shall remain in effect until the Brattleboro Selectboard amends, rescinds, or suspends this order, or until the governor declares an end to the COVID-19 state of emergency, which I believe is right now only until June 15th. Did you find out?
Yeah, I wasn't able to find it quickly, so I gave up quickly as well. But
that's fine.
I think you're right, but I can't imagine it's going to end on June 15th.
I can't imagine we're not going to be wearing masks.
I'm going to just pull rank and say I want this on the agenda for our June 16th, at least to confirm that it's going to continue for the immediate time being. Daniel?
Oh, I was just going to add on the I forget what the heading is, but anyway, it's whichever is sooner, right? So either we rescind it or the governor says we're no longer in a state of emergency. So, but if we want to talk about it again in 2 weeks' time.
Oh, you muted.
It's probably good.
I think we do, just because the governor, there's politics going on with the state of emergency that has to do with state funding from the feds and all that stuff. So that's not necessarily speaking to Brattleboro's needs. So,
no.
I'd like to make it clear to everybody out there that this is not something that we intend to order for an ongoing basis if not necessary. Ian?
Yeah, and I'll just speak to that for a second because I brought it up as well. Daniel, I think your point is well taken. You know, we did attach it to the governor's order with the rest of the language. And I think maybe what I heard was just like seeing a date was what that person was interested in. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And so that we don't have to amend it if the date changes from the governor's emergency order, it makes sense not to put one on. So, yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, I tried to do something while I shouldn't try to multitask. Peter.
Thank you. Yeah, what I hear from among you is don't change the text of the document, but him as chair is saying we're going to put it on so that we can kind of revisit it and see if there's anything more that ought to be reviewed and possibly amended at that time on June 16th. And that sounds like a really good middle ground place to land on this. I thought
Brandy,
the intent right?
I thought Brandy and I were saying change the kid thing. You want to let that go until?
Oh, no. I'm sorry. So
No,
yes,
no.
I think you're all interested in changing the kid language. I'm talking specifically now about the effective period. That there wouldn't be any change in the language to that, but Tim is just advising everybody, you know, pay attention to the additional comments you're hearing and your own experiences, because we're going to talk about it again on June 16th. Is that a fair characterization?
Absolutely.
That's what I hear.
Everyone okay with that? And procedurally, what do we need to do at this point, Peter?
So procedurally, if the one change you're going to make is to the exceptions language, then I think what would be appropriate is for me to read it one more time for the record, for somebody to say so moved, and for you to take that official action. And what you'll be doing is amending and reissuing this order as adopted by your resolution last week with the modified language. And we'll prepare that in a proper format that the 5 of you can sign again. And Jan will come around and get your signatures so that we do actually have a modified document. And I'll make clear in both news release form and the daily updates to the community the modification to that part of the document.
Okay. Thank you.
Sounds perfect. And I'll tap Brandy if she doesn't mind to make the motion. She's the other parent concern.
Okay.
So your motion would be to amend the COVID-19 emergency order, wearing face coverings required, to read in the exceptions paragraph, cloth face coverings are not required on young children under age 5 and should not be placed on anyone who has trouble breathing or anyone who is unconscious, incapacitated, or otherwise unable to remove the mask without assistance.
Okay. So moved.
Sounds good to me. All those in favor of the just spoken slight change, say aye.
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 And that's 5-0, none opposed. All right, so I would love to draw a little separation mark by taking a quick break. How does everybody feel about that? We have some important business to take care of coming up after the break, as they say. How about 7:55?
Sounds good.
Sweet.
Almost exactly 10 minutes. All right. Patrick, we need some sort of, the board is on break now, placard or something. Thank you,
Some
everyone.
elevator music.
See you in 9 or 10 minutes. Let's call back to order the, what day is this? The May 26th, 2020 Brattleboro Selectboard meeting. Thanks for rejoining us, everybody. We are moving on now to some business for the water and sewer commissioners. So I think we need a motion to become water and sewer commissioners.
So moved.
Brandy has moved to become water and sewer commissioners. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? None, and that's 5-0. First up is a proposed fiscal year 21 utilities fund budget, and I believe Peter is going to kick us off.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll have just a couple of brief overview remarks to kind of set the table, and then Steve Barrett is going to take you deep into the details on this. But I did want to highlight before Steve begins that we have a really significant discussion to have a little while later this evening regarding rates. And as you know, and the public, I hope, knows, those who have been paying attention know, we are proposing rate increases, and those relate not to the increased cost of doing business, but rather to the capital cost for the replacement of the water plant, which is an overdue generational replacement. And so we'll talk about that in its own context later on. But I wanted to underscore that underscore the levelness of the stability of the operating budget, in making that contrast to that conversation we're going to have later about rates. So in summary, the utility fund revenues are actually proposed to go down slightly this year, down 1.7% in FY21 compared to FY20. A decrease of a little over $100,000 for the year. So basically flat, even with the rate increase. And there's some reasons why in the full analysis of all the different revenues, but the fundamentally how that relates to the recommendation on rates is that the model that we've been using hadn't been recalibrated in several years, and it had an old assumption for consumption, for how much water gets used by customers in the model. And what we found is the last few years, we actually hadn't been selling as much water as had been predicted. And so we hadn't been collecting as much on the water rents line item as was expected. And so it was important for making sure that we had accurate projections going forward as we were making the calculations to bring you the recommendations on the rate increases. It was important to have that model properly calibrated. So when we did that and applied it to this year, even with a recommended 2% increase in the actual rate paid for water, the total revenues in the utilities fund are expected to decrease by $106,000. The utilities fund expenditures are proposed to increase, but only by $22,000, or less than 0.5%. So again, essentially a very, very tiny amount up on expenditures, a small amount down in revenues, essentially a flat level funded budget from last year. And Steve Barrett is going to provide the details of some of the highlights of the line items, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions or discuss any of the particular line items that you may want to dig deeper into. Thank you. While Steve is coming on, I'll say he'll also address, as part of his presentation, we'll do the budget, operating budget first, and then he'll also address the capital plan for FY21, so you can see how that piece fits into this. When you are finished with the discussion regarding the budget, then I'll have an additional presentation to make regarding the rates.
Good evening, everybody.
Peter. And welcome Steve Barrett and Dan Tyler to the show.
So I'm going to start off here. Thank you, Peter, for your overview of the budget. And we're going to have Dan Tyler. He's going to go over the line items and the operating budget. We worked on this budget carefully and closely together, along with the chief operators of the water treatment plant, the distribution, storage, and wastewater treatment. So each year we go over each line item to make sure that we're accurate and reflecting the needs. So Dan, if you would.
Hi. So as Peter mentioned, everything's pretty well level funded. So we just wanted to kind of run down through some of the categories and highlight some of the changes that are taking place. This is the expenditures on the utility budget proposed. The first category is the Pleasant Valley expenses. Going down through on sludge removal, you'll see a $4,000 decrease. That goes back to that waste line that we're hoping to install from the plant down to the existing sewer. So we'll probably have to clean out the lagoons once that line's installed. This expense is the annual cleaning of that. So we've decreased it some because we don't expect the quantity that we've had in the past. Hopefully after that line will go away completely. So all of these expenses from Pleasant Valley, though, these are the costs associated with running the plant, and everything else is level. The next category is the expenses for the wells. This is the second plant located on the retreat meadows. Same situation, very few changes. The electrical consumption at that plant has been down over the last couple of years, so we reduced that $1,000. Everything else is level. Moving on to water distribution and storage. This is the crews that you see out on the streets making the repairs and installations on the lines. There's some changes in the benefits and the employees' wages due to the contracts and the non-union salary adjustments, but otherwise everything else is level. Wastewater treatment plant, the same thing with the salaries. The big one that sticks out on this is the solar net metering has allowed us to reduce the electrical costs by $29,000. So that's pretty significant. We're also reducing the odor control by $10,000. At this point, we feel that that's kind of under control, and we've got a good handle on what it takes, and we can reduce that a little bit. Slight increase for building repairs and safety equipment of $500 a piece. The pump station category is for sewer pump stations, and again, the electrical line we're proposing lowering $5,000, and that's also due to the solar net metering. Everything else stays the same. Sewer mains is kind of the other half of the crews you see out on the street. Some slight adjustments to salaries and benefits. Otherwise, everything else level. The administration category, we've increased our permit and testing line by $5,000. It's the only change. Equipment maintenance and fuel, everything stays the same, right down through. And that comes out, as Peter said, of an increase of $22,249 or 0.4%. I don't know if anyone has any questions on any of those lines.
Okay.
Open it up for board questions. No? I have a question, if not, but now I have to go find it. I wasn't ready.
Would you like me to go into the Capitol? Or do you have a question about the budget?
I do have a question. Sorry, I just expected folks to have something to give me time to find my line I was looking for.
So one of the things I'll just fill before the questions asked is, as Peter said, this change in the revenue source. The other thing that if we end up having a hot summer, like it's starting right now, that can have a huge impact on our utility revenues also. So when we do have a long, hot year, that brings in more money, more showers, more pools, more activity with water. So, the utilities is a business that you don't know, it's supply and demand. As the rates have gone up over the years, then you're going to find that people conserve water. And generally people have Every time they replace a faucet, every time they replace a fixture, they're putting in water saving devices, and it's making a huge difference. So that's another reason that the consumption goes down.
I totally can't find it, but maybe you can find it for me. Water meter upgrades, where should I be looking for that?
Well, they'll be in the capital fund.
Oh, sorry.
There's also, which I'll go over next, but there are some funds that's also are used in the general budget for water meters. But when I go over to the capital, I will outline the water meter account. That's a capital account.
And is that a yearly capital account?
It's a yearly capital account to upgrade the meters in the system.
And I apologize, but I saw a line about penalties. That might have been. I saw that the estimation on penalties was going up. And again, I think it's because I'm looking at the wrong document. I might have maybe be looking at last week's.
You're right.
Just the capital,
yeah, you're right. It's in the revenue section under sewer interest and penalties. A $10,000 increase.
Mm-hmm. I can speak to that. It's just intended to reflect that there has been an increase in that the last couple of years. So we had a $46.5 thousand year and a $45.5 thousand year, and we had been carrying a $40,000 line item in the budget. So we've changed that to $50,000 just to make sure that we're not collecting those sorts of things, because they aren't completely predictable. There's just judgment calls that need to be made on some of these smaller items. But if we always lean towards the conservative side and predict less than what we really expect to collect, then we end up collecting more in rates, in water and sewer rates, than is necessary to carry the load. So at a year like this, when we're taking a really deep dig and looking carefully at every piece so that we make sure that the recommendation for a rate increase is not any greater than necessary, we take an especially careful look at lines like this and make sure that we're not under predicting not the revenue that we're likely to collect.
Okay, thank you.
Peter, Tim, I got a quick question. Just curious on, I lost it. Water distribution and storage. Is the rate increase, or is the increase for staff salaries reflect a new job, or just the salaries of all of the employees?
Just the salaries of the employees. Salaries and benefits for the employees changed a little more this past annual cycle than most years because of the negotiation of a new union contract. And in this area where there's some supervisors that are non-union, then the adjustments that were running parallel to the union contracts, where we made adjustments in the compensation for non-union employees, is also those adjustments are reflected in this budget.
Thank you.
Steve, if you want to move on to capital.
Okay, so I'll move into the capital. The first item is the DPW site evaluation, and the funding is to further develop a concept plan for the Department of Public Works facility on Fairground Road. The current facility was constructed in 1950 and is used by the Highway and Utilities Division. Over the last year, we've done some engineering to determine the feasibility of either using the existing facility, building there, or looking at other sites. We haven't got that report back. That's something that soon we expect to get a report, which we'll review with the town manager, and then eventually we'll bring that report to the board. But at this point, what we're looking for is additional funding as we explore options. We're going to need funds to either testing different sites or things of that nature. So that's why we're asking for funding under the DPW site evaluation. The Hinsdale Bridge water main replacement, when they do the Hinsdale Bridge project, that will also include an upgrade to the water main on Vernon Road. The original water main was put in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And the elevation of the bridge where it comes into Vernon Road is going to be changed so that we're proposing to upgrade that water main on Vernon Road at that time. It just makes sense to upgrade the water main. And that's $50,000, $51,000. And that project is actively being engineered and designed. So we expect that work to be done in the next couple of years. Water meters, Tim, this is one of the ones that maybe you have a question on. We have 3,900, almost 4,000 meters in the system. The original water meters were put in the 1970s. And over the years, we continue to upgrade the meters. The older meters lose their efficiency, they're mechanical meters. And so what we do is instead of, to replace all the meters in town, it would cost probably $1 million. So what we've done, chosen to do over the years, is just to continue to upgrade meters as we go. And this program's been going on for quite a few years now, and we replaced almost 2,000 meters in the system. And so a regular meter cost about $275, where a 2-inch meter could be up to $1,000. So this is an important program. Even the old mechanical meters are quite efficient when we take them out, but the newer meters, when we put those in, are about 99.9%. And they're no longer mechanical, they're electronic. There's less moving parts. So as we continue the program, that's what this money is used for, is to upgrade the meters in the system. Signal Hill Pump Station, that is off of Hillcrest and Signal Hill. We had the state of Vermont does a sanitary survey of the water system. They look at all the pump stations, the water treatment plant. They look at our piping, and this particular pump station was identified as needing to be upgraded. The pump station was put in the 1970s. It was a private development, and that's when Signal Hill and Hillcrest was constructed. And the town took over that pump station at that time. And so it has serviced the town for many years, and it needs an upgrade. We're proposing $300,000 for that pump station. I did come to the board a few meetings ago to seek authorization for engineering for the design. So this money is to actually build the pump station. And we expect to have a full design done within this year, and then build the pump station probably in the spring. When that's done, it will also, it'll not only meet today's needs on Signal Hill and Hillcrest and Guilford Street, it'll be constructed in such a way that it will meet future demands also. And not only this is for potable water, but it's also for the fire service in that area. The last hydrant is before Hillcrest in that area, and we're proposing to increase the fire safety zone with hydrants in that area, and for future build out if needed. Black Mountain Pump Station generator, there's a pump station up by SIT, and it's a water pump station, and that does not have a backup power supply. And so when we lose power, that whole neighborhood loses water. So what we're proposing to do is add a backup generator. That's one of the last stations that we have that does not have emergency backup power. Putney Road utility planning, and let me go back. The generator's cost is $7,100. Putney Road utility planning, $15,000. This is to begin planning for the State of Vermont Agency of Transportation. They're developing the Putney Road corridor, or going to install roundabouts and other improvements. We have quite a length of water mains in this area that need to be upgraded. So this will help us do some preliminary planning for those changes. So when all this work's done, we don't want to have substandard water mains under a new roadway. So that's why we're trying to plan ahead, and for these upgrades that should be done and will be done as part of that project. when they upgrade Putney Road. That project's out 5 years, but these projects take a long time to develop and to plan ahead. Putney Road water relocation. Again, this is part of the Putney Road project. This is to replace some of the water mains. So one part of this is planning. The other is actually putting money aside for the relocation of the mains, which is $250,000. Sewer main, whetstone interceptor tightening. The whetstone interceptor is a wastewater line that runs along the Whetstone Brook that was originally installed in 1957. That was the main component that cleaned up the Whetstone Brook. Prior to that, all the sewage was dumped directly into the Whetstone Brook. So in 1957, this line intercepted all that wastewater that was dumped into the brook, and it eventually there was an interceptor put along Putney Road and then down to the sewer plant, which was constructed in '65. So because this interceptor is in the brook, it's frowned on now, although it was the major project that cleaned up that brook. In today's world, you would never construct a wastewater line in a brook. So because of that, we want to protect the integrity. There's some lining that goes along. There's camera work that happens. There's manholes that are waterproofed to ensure that the wastewater doesn't go out into the stream, or that the stream enters the wastewater system and we have to pay money to treat just plain water. So that's an ongoing project to protect the integrity of that sewer interceptor. And that's $30,600. Walnut Street sewer, $53,000. There's a sewer main that goes over Walnut Street that takes the Tyler Terrace Street area, part of Main Street, goes down over the bank and underneath the railroad track to our interceptor. The line broke and failed last year. Our crews were able to make a repair. And so this year we're going to hire a company. This is similar, some of you were on the board when we had a line that, it was a drainage line that broke near Harris. We'll hire a company that has railroad flaggers and can work in those zones with the railroad to make repairs to this pipe. It's estimated at this point to be $30,600. Or $53,000, I'm sorry. Old Guilford Road manholes, again, you as a board have approved, there's actually a contract that we approved this year to waterproof some manholes on Old Guilford Road, and we're going to propose to continue doing additional manholes this year in the budget. It's important not only to make sure the integrity of those manholes are solid and good condition, but also it helps prevent odors and such in that neighborhood. Putney Road sewer upgrade, again, that's $50,000. This is for the Putney Road project. Again, there's some sewer mains that will need to be upgraded, but not as great as the number of water mains that needs to be done as part of that state project. And vehicles, overall, we try to look at a 7-year replacement for smaller vehicles and a 10-year for larger equipment. This year, there's 2 pieces of equipment. One was a loader that was $100,000, and we feel it's in good condition, and we don't feel it needs to be replaced, even though we use this as a guideline, the 10-year. But we're proposing not to replace that. And we also, there's a service truck that we feel is in good condition, and we're not proposing to replace that either. What we are proposing to replace is a service truck. This is at our water treatment plant, and also it plows all the facilities and pump stations. That's $42,000. And then we have what we call an economy car. Quite a few years ago, we eliminated pickup trucks and got small efficiency cars for the operators when they're out doing testing or checking on pump stations. We bought 2 cars, one for the water treatment plant and one for the wastewater. This year, we're proposing to change to trade in those cars and look at electrical vehicles. We already have 1 electrical vehicle, and that's for our engineer at Public Works. That has worked out really well. It primarily uses electric. It does have a gas engine, but I don't think we've used 20 gallons of gas in a couple years. It strictly works on the electrical. So it's $26,500 for each of the cars that we're proposing to replace, one in the water and one in the wastewater. And that's my report on the capital for the utilities division. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thanks, Steve. I have one, but I want to let my fellow board members go first. Mine's difficult. Ian.
All right, probably a newbie question. For the whetstone interceptor tightening, has there been any discussion in the past of moving it so that it's not in the place where it's problematic now?
That's a great point.
And then, I'll add one more thing to it. How often are we tightening it? So like, how often are we spending this 30 grand?
So the answer to the first question, I'm not sure, maybe 100 million. We're talking big dollars. What we're talking about is a line that goes all the way from West Brattleboro, follows the Whetstone Brook, all the way down to Main Street Bridge and connects down by the railroad tracks. And originally, all those homes on the avenue, they discharged directly into the brook. So if we were going to upgrade this line, you would have to intercept all those lines. You'd have to put in pumping stations, lift stations, and then you'd have to go down the avenue and pump that wastewater. So we've done some studies on it and we've looked at it. So I guess in my lifetime, what I focused on is to protect the integrity of the pipe. And it is an ongoing cost. It is an ongoing expense, but it seems to be at this time the right direction to go as far as this line. We've also entertained and looked at grants. There's been some, we put in money for, at times there's been funding potentially to address that. And the way to do that would be to start in a small section, maybe Flat Street, and put a pump station, there, and then work your way west. So it's a big project. And it was a big project when it was done, really, in '57.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
That same pipe, Steve, how did it fare in Tropical Storm Irene?
There was one situation where it actually there's a trestle that is behind where the country store is on the avenue, and it's actually a small bridge that carries the pipe over the Whetstone, and the storm, the height of the water took that pipe right out completely. But it was quite a project. We actually had that back in service within a week, which was pretty incredible. But and then we had one break in one other location, but overall it held up pretty good. And we did receive funds to armor the pipe down near the Whetstone pathway. If you look in the brook, you can actually see this piping, and then you'll actually see some large rocks that are protecting that pipe. But overall, it fared pretty well, except for the trestle.
And are you comfortable going forward if there were to be another storm that it's protected?
I'm not comfortable that it might not get taken out for a storm of that size and the height of what the water, level was. It could do damage. It was built with pretty good integrity this time, and it was last time. But it took the bridge that holds it, which is called the trestle, and the piping completely out. But that was all replaced with more modern piping, but I don't think it could take the forces of an Irene again, for sure.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
I think we do have a question from the public, but first I just wanted to ask mine. The Putney Road water relocation, big ticket item. Anybody paying attention to this meeting might see that. And I want to make it clear that I'm in favor of the Putney Road project, but we're talking about something, it's really going to take place in 2025. And when is the actual Putney Road project? Is that what you're referring to when you say the project, or do you refer to our water relocation?
Peter?
It's both. So the utility relocation has to happen before the major road work can be completed. And the overall, because it's such a large scale project, the overall scope of this is expected to take a couple of years of construction. So right now that's predicted to be 25 to 27. There have been earlier projections that where schedules got missed. So it's not 100% guaranteed, but our recent communications, and when I say recent, I mean the last couple of years with VTrans and with Green Engineering, who's the firm, it's an international engineering firm that is contracted to get this project done for VTrans. You know, this is a big deal to them. It's a very expensive, very large scale, very important project in the VTrans system. And we have a level of confidence. You know, there's no guarantee, but based on the progress that's being made and the interaction we've recently had around these utility adjustments, you know, we have a decent level of confidence that, you know, barring bumping into some unexpected situation that causes a further delay, it's reasonable to expect that in 2025, the utility work will commence, and by 2027, it'll be a new roadway.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess the 7 years that was sticking in my mind is the 7 to completion with any luck.
Yeah.
And sorry, just a quick follow-up and then Liz, but the first year of capital funding, you want to flesh that out? How much more years of capital funding do we see for the stuff that's in their way?
Steve will speak to that from the plan that he presented last week.
Yeah.
Or 2 weeks ago.
Goes out quite a bit. If we're talking, Dan, jump in here anytime. We just got that estimate, which was pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have it right in front of me, but it's the 250,000 for the next 5 years, I believe. It was.
Yes, it is.
The engineering.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's 250 for the next 5 years, 6 years.
Yeah.
Next.
A total of 300, just to be clear. So it's not 250 a year. It's a total of 300. The 50 for this year, and then 5 more years of 50.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Liz had something, and then I'm going to throw it to a couple.
Yeah, I have a follow-up to Tim's follow-up. For the Putney Road, you know, it's a VTrans project. Does VTrans anticipate that every municipality will have to move their utilities prior to roadway construction and therefore have funding for that?
Well, what happens is the town put the pipes in the states right away, is the way it works. And so we have, you know, the responsibility to upgrade those mains when they do a project. And it only makes sense. And these projects are, you know, there's time here to plan for this. And that's why we're asking for this money even in this year. And there may be methods, we'll hire engineering to look at it. And maybe some of this work can be done before to save money as we look at the project overall. On Putney Road, there's a asbestos main that was put in, you know, after the war, during the war, because of the money, they put in asbestos instead of, you know, steel pipe or cast iron. So that's important. That's been on our radar for many years to replace, but you wouldn't go up there and just replace that line unless there was a road project. So they really have to go, they have to dovetail together when you have these projects. And the thing is, we're able to plan it out for years ahead, and that's a responsible thing to do. But yeah, it can be difficult for some municipalities that don't have a good capital plan, and it could cause a lot of problems. And that's it's a situation where the need's there.
And
I'd like
so
to-
we could say you're doing as best as you can.
Got it.
You could say that. I'd like to add to that it's easy for us to sit here at this moment. Steve has explained well why this is a good moment for us to undertake this work, but yeah, it's expensive and, it wasn't something that was altogether our choice. But, one thing that's easy to lose sight of when we get confronted with one of these is, what could they have been thinking of? Our predecessors many decades ago, and kind of like the interceptor conversation in the Whetstone, where, we scratch our heads today and say, how could they put a sewer pipe in a brook? But it was actually a huge improvement at the time. This situation with this long run of pipe in Putney Road, the alternative to placing it in the state's right of way is acquiring all the land necessary to have the town's own rights to place the pipe. So there was probably a very substantial savings at the time when the pipe was installed to do it this way. And now it's, what are we, 70 years later, that we're confronting a major expense to move it, but it's time for it to be replaced anyway. So,
Are there other utilities besides water and sewer in that right of way that should be upgraded, and the parallel plans for that at this time?
There are, but they're not the town's utilities. Water and sewer are our responsibility. There are the other utility companies that are involved in relocating their infrastructure.
Thank you.
Another example of this would be, as you recall, just it's like 2 years ago, we had that water main break on Main Street. So at the time, we did the upgrade to, the state came in and did a project on Canal Street and also did Main Street. And we chose not to do the water main at that time. Well, though we've upgraded the water main from Lower Main Street up to Elliott, we chose not to put the capital money, aside to do that project down at Main Street. And the other reason for that was economics to the shop, holders, the store owners, because they only can take a large project every so many years. They couldn't take multiple years of a water main project and then multiple years of a upgrade to the sidewalks and the infrastructure. So that project, we didn't do, but then we were lucky because the upgrade lasted enough so that we did have a water main break, but now the road, will be ready to be upgraded soon, but it wasn't brand new. The danger here is to have the project take place, have a roundabout built, and then have the water main break, and then the town be responsible for rebuilding a roundabout. And so that would be cost prohibitive. So it's a matter of making the right decisions at the right time. There'll be sections of water main that are still good up there. There's a 16-inch water main that was put in the 60s that will be good. We won't need to replace that section. If there's sections we won't need to replace. So, there's some things that really should be done, and there's others that we can look at on Putney Road and say we don't need to replace the whole thing. But like with the asbestos main, it certainly should just be removed at this time, or at the time of the project.
And that's 5,000 feet of asbestos main that would be removed. And there's about 1,000 feet of sewer line and 2,100 feet of 16-inch water main that would be relocated. Significant amount of pipe.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for all that. Anyone else on that particular topic? Before we go on to FY21 utility rates, we have a couple questions concerning what we've spoken about so far within water sewer. David, would you like to turn on your camera, or maybe Patrick does that for you? I still haven't figured out who actually turns on the camera. I think it's Patrick. Or you can just join us by audio. And Ricky is on deck, just to let you know. David? I don't see David coming up. Maybe
he's still showing as being in the meeting.
Yeah. Well, can we try, David, if you're not ready, let's go to Ricky, if you're able to chime in and ask a water sewer question.
Hi, I was wondering if there is any plan to motion requiring property managers to do lab certified water quality testing for occupancies and facilities, similar to how there is the fire hazard prevention ordinance enforcement.
Okay.
We haven't proposed that. Our responsibility is to deliver water that's been tested to the tap. And then when you get into these larger buildings, we haven't discussed having an ordinance for interior inspections or testing. That we're following the state and federal guidelines for drinking water. So we haven't explored those options.
From a town perspective, that water quality report just came out, didn't it?
It did, yeah. So the water that the town produces at the water treatment plant and pipes through the town's water mains is very good, clean, healthy, safe water. As Steve pointed out, once it gets past a meter and into a private building, it's then the responsibility, the private piping inside is the responsibility of the owner of the private building.
Because property managers aren't taking that responsibility, though, just as they weren't taking the responsibility to do fire hazard prevention previously, then why are we not making more requirements of them to have higher standards?
Well, I mean, it might have to do with the feasibility of being able to reliably test within every building in Brattleboro. But does Steve or Dan want to comment on that?
Well, that's an enormous task. I mean, you know, the objective of delivering clean water as a public water supply was to have an infrastructure to bring that water to the dwellings. And so once you have your dwelling and we've delivered the water as safe drinking water, then currently it's the responsibility of the building owner. And I don't really know how we would enter into a program to inspect if we would have, you know, it'd be another whole layer that I don't think we're prepared to take on.
I think the question was speaking about the fire inspections and the program that the town instituted with a new fee related to fire inspections. And I think it's a really valid question, but the answer is that program already existed. There wasn't a fee attached to it because we only came out about once every 10 years to conduct those those inspections. But the requirements that were, you know, the checklist, if you will, that the inspectors went through upon looking at these different properties already existed. And the recommendation staff made and the decision that the select board made was to take that existing program and increase the frequency of inspections by attaching a fee to that and adding some staff hours to get that work done. In this case, it would require actually creating something brand new from scratch that would involve testing the private water in these buildings. It could be done, but it would have to be done as an entirely new program that would have to be scoped and staffed, and fees would have to be attached to it unless the ratepayers of the system were going to share that cost equally. So that's where it sits at this time.
Is there any second motion to initial that program?
I guess the simple answer is no. Members of the public can't make a motion in our deliberations. So I'd like to move on. David actually has chimed in and said that he's having some technology issues. So he's sent me a question, and I'm just going to read it verbatim. And I think it's more to Peter's expertise. Has to do with the budget. So for deferred capital expenditures, vehicles, what happens to money? Is it set aside for future, or does capital plan get adjusted?
So
That's sort of verbatim.
Right. In a case where money is appropriated for a vehicle or a project for that matter, and then it doesn't move forward, we don't buy the vehicle or complete the project as quickly as anticipated. In the capital appropriations, unlike general fund appropriations, they stay with the purpose for which they were approved. So in the general fund, if you approved $50,000 for some purpose, and then that purpose didn't go forward in the course of the fiscal year, at the end of the fiscal year on June 30th, the $50,000 would fall back into the general fund balance. In both the capital expenditures of the general fund, when things are moved, money is moved from the general fund to the capital fund to support general fund activities, and in the operation of the utilities fund and the parking fund for that matter, when money has been identified and approved to be spent on a capital purchase or project, it stays with that until it's completed. We report from time to time to the board about the money that has accrued in capital fund balance because of, say, projects that maybe we thought were going to cost $100,000 and it got completed, let's say, for 85, so there was $15,000 worth of savings. That money at the end of that project will roll into the capital fund balance, and from time to time, we fund something either partially or completely using capital fund balance. So we advise you about those kinds of actions from time to time as we work through them. But the deferral of something where something was scheduled for a particular year, but we come upon that particular year and the piece of equipment is still in really good shape, and so we don't believe it needs to be replaced. Because money hasn't actually been appropriated for that yet, that's going to be money we would ask for in another year's budget cycle. It's not money that defers. Money only defers on with the deferred expense when it has been approved by the select board or in some large expenditures by representative town meeting.
Thank you. If there's no board objections, I'm going to move on to item C, preliminary discussion of fiscal year 21 utility rates. And Peter will kick it off first.
Thank you. So I'd like to start this by just being really clear about what we're recommending. It is a significant rate increase, and so we want to acknowledge that and lay that out as the starting point of the conversation, and then explain the rationale for why we have brought you the recommendation that we have this evening, and answer any questions you may have, and take this conversation wherever you may want to take it if you have concerns about this. But the recommendation is that for each of the next 5 years, starting with July 1st of this year and each of the successive July 1sts, that there would be a 2% increase in sewer rates. While we are currently experiencing a year where the operating costs are flat, it's unusual. Over the long haul of things, operating costs do increase like all other costs do. And our expectation is that a rate of increase of approximately 2% a year is a reasonable carrying cost for the utility. And so that's why the sewer reflects 2% each year. The water, we also are recommending a 2% increase for this coming July 1st, a month from now, and then 6% for each of the following 4 July 1sts. And the reason for that is because of the replacement of the water filtration plant up at Pleasant Valley. We've had discussions about this explicitly a couple of weeks ago. and there's additional engineering work being done to prepare for that replacement. The existing water filter plant was put online in 1989 and had an expected useful life of 20 years. So that's 2009. There was replacement planning that began in the 2003-2004 timeframe, but for perfectly valid reasons related to higher priorities in the sewer system and elsewhere in the water system, there have been investments made in utilities capital that postponed this project. We're at a place now where we really can't postpone it any longer without taking a very great risk. 31-year-old water plant that was built with an expected useful life of 20. So we are doing everything we can to engineer that well and have it be efficient, but also a good solid investment in a long-term performance, something we hope to be able to represent to you and expect to be able to represent to you as a expected useful life greater than the 20 years of the original plant. That's the path we're on. And right now, the conservative cost estimate for that project is $11 million. That includes a 25% contingency factor. So we hope that we'll be able to bring the final cost estimates and then ultimately the bid award to you at a lower cost than that. And as you know from the discussion a couple of weeks ago, there is a very generous program of funding assistance through the state's revolving loan fund. The money that's available for utility projects, municipal utility projects through the state is very significant and very cheap compared to market rates for borrowing money. And so there is the possibility that we might borrow the money we need for this project at 0% interest. That happens during certain cycles with this fund. It is not guaranteed, and we're a year away from the time when we'd be actually locking in an interest rate and borrowing the money and proceeding with the project. So we've got ground to cover yet on this, but in forecasting what it would take to carry this fund forward in a responsible, financially responsible manner while we're taking care of that very major capital improvement, we have recommended that you adopt an ordinance that would say a 5-year ordinance. It's typical that these are done. It's not always done this way. It can be done a year at a time. But particularly when facing a large capital improvement like this, it's good to lock in rate increases for the future so that it's really clear to the public that there's a The recommendation would be that you adopt an ordinance that has the 2% increases for sewer, the 2%, and then 6% increases for water, and that you revisit these rates each year. So a year from now, you'd be looking at how did things turn out with the final planning for that water plant? How much is it really going to cost for the money we need to borrow in order to make it happen? What happened with the cash flow in the fund this year? We're assuming that there's going to be a couple of $1 million available from the utility fund balance that'll be applicable to the water plant project expense. And we have a high level of confidence in that for reasons we'll describe in a minute. But things can change over the course of the year, and hopefully in this case for the better, since we've done some conservative cost estimating on the water plant. And so what we think would be prudent is that you adopt this path forward so that we know that we'd be able to sustain the solid financial operations of the utility and complete the major water improvement project. And then by revisiting these rates each year, as circumstances change, you'd be able to make adjustments. And the likelihood is that any adjustments would be reducing the amount of increase. The reason for the 5 2s and the reason for the 2 and the 6s, because the 5 2s is related more to just the general carrying cost of the sewer utility. But we applied 2 tests, if you will, 2 standards that we thought were important in estimating the cash flow of the utility fund. Right now, there's about $3.5 million of unallocated fund balance in the utility fund. And you and prior select boards over the last few years in seeing this water project coming have been careful to try to preserve as much fund balance there as possible so that at this moment, when we did undertake the water project, we could essentially, in household terms, have a good down payment amount, right? A large enough amount in cash that we would limit the amount of borrowing that we needed to do. So there's $3.5 million of fund balance there. We want to apply a standard. We believe it would be prudent for you to agree to apply a standard that we would never let the cash balance in the utility fund in any particular year drop below $1 million. The reason for that is there's no adopted standard in the utility fund the way there is the adopted guideline of 10% fund balance for the general fund. And in the absence of an adopted standard that we need to adhere to, we believe that it's prudent not to let the overall fund balance drop below $1 million because when there is a surprise in these systems, it's expensive. This is mostly underground utility or major expensive plant infrastructure. And so when something fails, it's not usually an inexpensive surprise project for us. It's usually an expensive surprise project. And in order to ensure the continued ability of the fund, we've managed, as our predecessors have managed these funds very well over the years, so that the town's utility has been really both financially solid and able to be resilient in moments like addressing that damage that occurred in Irene, and at other times. We recently, just in the last few years, had a very large water main that runs under Western Avenue, and where it crosses I-91 attached to the bottom of the bridge, the Route 9 bridge that is at exit 2, it was leaking. It was something we couldn't allow to continue. It had to be addressed, and it hadn't been on a capital plan because it suddenly began leaking. So those kinds of projects can occur and need to be addressed promptly. And so we recommend that we maintain a standard of no less than $1 million in the combined water and sewer portions of the utilities fund, and that we not let either one, and in this case we're talking about water because water is where the big financial draw is about to happen, that we don't let either of those two components drop into the negative. The thinking there is if we allow the water component in doing the financial analysis around the health of the utility fund and the operations and cash flow in the utility fund, if we let the water component drop into the red, then sewer ratepayers are actually subsidizing the water operation. Now, that's a relatively minor matter, but we think it's not an entirely unimportant one. It's relatively minor because most customers of the system are both water and sewer. But it's not entirely true. There are water customers that are not on the sewer system, and there are sewer customers that are not on the water system. And we think it's important as a matter of fair operation of the utility that we not allow one part of the system to carry the other part of the system. If we got into that habit, we would have an enduring inequity. And so the two standards we applied to our cash flow analysis was don't let water go in the negative, and don't let the fund in its entirety go below $1 million. And when we applied that test, we then looked at alternatives that would have as small as possible of an increase in the first year. We thought maybe we'd be able to, in these times with COVID, still a real issue for all of us to deal with, and other financial stressors, that if it was possible to have a year when neither the water nor the sewer increased, for the first year, and then we did increases in the future when we need to for that capital improvement for water, and then to carry forward in good financial standing, what would that look like? And that would be carrying forward from this current year. It's probably worth reminding everyone at this point that we had a 5-year ordinance that we completed a year ago that was adopted by the select board in conjunction with the completion of the major sewer improvements and the bond that was issued for that, or the borrowing from the revolving loan fund for the upgrade of the wastewater treatment plant and some major components of the sewer system. That was over $30 million worth of work, and there was actually, and it's just coincidence, I'm going to explain in a moment why it's just coincidence and not numbers we pulled out of the air. But there actually were 5 years of 6% increases on the sewer side and 2% increases on the water side that were in that ordinance for those 5 years. And then we had 1 year of 0. So we are in a year where the rates that everyone is paying are exactly the same as they were a year ago. But going back from there was that 5-year ordinance where it was 2s for water and 6s for sewer. The reason why what we got in front of you this evening is the exact reverse of that is because we started off with this idea of what would it look like if we did 0s in the first year. and any alternative, no matter what we played with, without going to 8% or 9% increases in the out years, any 0% alternative failed the test. We then looked at what would happen if it was 1% increases in both water and sewer. And those failed. We looked at two different alternatives there, and they failed to keep the water balance in the black. They fell into a situation with just 1% increase in the first year on water, and then the big expenses that are coming, those alternatives failed to keep the water system carrying its own weight. And one of the two tests failed both. Didn't keep the fund funded to $1 million either. We then looked at alternatives where it was a 2% increase for water and a 0% increase for sewer in the first year, and then again looking at up to 6% increases going out beyond that. And that alternative failed test number 2. We didn't keep the fund balance at or above $1 million. We looked at 3 different alternatives that would have 2s in the first year and then some different amounts of increase going out into the future years. And it was in that, running through those tests, that we arrived at what, given the 2 parameters we were trying to meet and given 2% increases in the first year, became the sweet spot, and that was 6% increases in water, continuing 2s for sewer and 6s for water going forward into the 4 following years. I do have some data I can share if you want to take a deeper dive into the outcomes of any of those different alternatives that we tested. But my main point here is, if we could have come to you and recommended less than 2 and 2 in the first year, or less than 6 for the water in each of the 4 following years, we would have been really happy to do that. We wish we could have done that, but it was trying to maintain the financial stability of the fund in the 2 ways that I've described, that we arrived at this recommendation before you tonight as being the least amount of increase that would carry the fund and meet those 2 standards. And that assumes, the full $11 million cost and so on of the plant. So there are ways in which, as we go forward, we might be able to bring you better news at these annual reviews, and you might be in an opportunity at some future cycle to reduce the amount of increase for a particular year. But for this beginning of this 5-year cycle and the importance of the construction of the water plant during the first part of this, we recommend that you adopt the 2s and the 6s as recommended.
All right. Well, you've got me most of the way. Why don't I kick it out to the other board members? I said most of the way. I saw Liz's hand go up first.
No, Ian was quite vehement.
Okay.
Liz, you first, please.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Well, I think this is some of the most important work that the town does, and I'm glad that it's being protected. My concern is kind of a regional concern. First is, how do these rates compare with what people in the surrounding towns are paying? And kind of a similar question is, have we considered a regional system? Would that be beneficial?
So let me speak to the second part and then ask Steve to speak to the first part. Because we're in Vermont, a regional system would mean running water out to places that currently are on wells, running public water out to places that are on wells. So there's not really an economy of scale to be gained there. Although under certain circumstances, it's unusual, but it does happen. We do go outside our borders and can bring in customers. And the most recent example of that was Algiers. So as part of the additions to the water and sewer system for Commonwealth Dairy and the Delta campus, the town system now services Algiers, and they are paying customers as part of our system, just like the folks in Brattleboro. So there are sometimes opportunities for that, but they're very limited in our rural environment. As to rates, we compare really favorably, but I don't know the details, and Steve does. So let me ask him to speak to it.
Okay, one other thing on regional, we also supply wastewater disposal at our facility, and we received extra funds when we built our facility. So we regionally take all the small towns in Windham County and then some in New Hampshire at our wastewater treatment plant. So that helps maintain or keep the cost down for people that have septic systems that are not on our system. And we also received, again, a fair amount of funding to become a regional host for those type of ways. So that's another place that we participate regionally. As far as the rates, there was a recent study that was done, and they actually used Brattleboro, so I jumped right on the bandwagon because that seemed appropriate. It included Brattleboro, Bennington, Rutland, Montpelier, Waterbury, and also we put in Keene. And if for a user that uses 1,200 cubic feet, that would be on the smaller end as far as a user, 2 people, approximately 100 gallons a day. The average cost per quarter was $211 out of all those facilities. Brattleboro falls in at 182. There were some highs in Bennington of 267, Montpelier 256. Waterbury was a little lower with 143. Keene was 267. So I think, within the region, we fall below that 211 average and would, including increases, so I think we're right within the area that we should be as compared to regionally.
Well, that's good news. Thank you.
I thought it was good news too.
Yes.
Daniel.
I did some math because I have here in front of me my water and sewer bill, and I just wanted to have like a sense of like what the real world impact of these rate increases would be. And so my bill for 600 cubic feet this last quarter came to 130.43. Sounds like I don't use that much compared to other people. And then next year, that the equivalent usage would be 133.04, and then in fiscal year 22, 137.66. And I didn't go out past that because, that 6% each year looks a lot. And I just wanted to kind of have a real sense of like how that would impact our household budget. And I mean, I'm only speaking for my own circumstances. I feel like I could probably find the extra money for it. But I know that for households that, really struggle, I mean, in my work today, I definitely talked with one that would struggle with this. So I'm just trying to weigh the benefit of having the improved plant and the impact on folks as ratepayers. And I suppose it made me think a little bit about my water meter. I had one of the old water meters. It was changed out. It was changed out because my bill all of a sudden stopped. I was like, oh, great, we're not using anything. And it was because the meter wasn't really working very well. And then when we got the new meter, it was a much better, more accurate record of how much water we were using, which actually turned out to be more than we were previously being billed for. So we had some years where we got away with it, I guess. So I wondered, like, would increasing the amount of water meters that we're installing give us a better picture of usage? Because we were talking earlier, I think, about like how revenue from water was down. And I'm not saying I want to like squeeze out more money from Brattleboro, but like we should pay for the water that we use, right? And those newer meters give a more accurate picture of that, it seems to me, as a layman.
Well, one of the things you got to realize, again, as I was talking before, we talked about water meters. If we were going to make $1 million investment and change all the meters, everybody has to pay for that. So, and that smaller user like yourself would have to pay for that $1 million. And there's less than 4,000 users. So when you start to look at the math that way, being conservative and replacing meters, we've done 2/3 of the meters at this point. Financially, it's a little bit more secure for the user to replace these meters as we have been for the last 10, 15 years. And the need, you know, there's no doubt about the need, and the water, a lot of people, you know, have felt. And when we did our first water plant, you know, 1989, we didn't have a water plant, and people didn't think we needed a water plant. There's a lot of people that felt you don't need a water plant. Well, we really sorely did. And so this plant has performed for us all these years, and it's necessary to provide that clean, safe drinking water. And there's a price. Water isn't free. You know, when we were kids, they didn't have water meters on any of the residential users. No residential users paid from a meter prior to 1975. It was, you could use all the water you want, and it was a flat fee. But that's back when we had large commercial users that use large amounts of water. So they kind of carried the homeowner back in the day. But now commercial users, they don't use water for their compressors anymore. They found ways to conserve that don't need water energy in their businesses. And we don't have those big factories anymore. So it comes down to all the users having to chip in for these services. I realize, you know, this is quarterly too that we're talking a bill. So, you know, that's my take on it.
Oh, Ian, sorry.
Yeah. So my question is more to the standards. I don't know who wrote this memo, but they did a great job. It was really, I guess it's just the way I think. So Peter introduced the standards in the opposite order that they're in the memo. So I'm talking about standard 2, which is keeping at least $1 million. So it seems to me that standard 1 makes a lot of sense, that we wouldn't want to mess around with going, and we want to stay in the black. That makes sense. Standard 2, because there's no adopted fund balance guidelines, standard 2 seems like there's a little bit of room that we can move around with. So I'm very curious if there had been any calculation done if we change standard 2 to $750,000 or change standard 2 to $500,000, whether that could, in the adjusting, because I really liked the testing you did with when standard 1 failed or standard 2 failed, that it wouldn't work. If you were to change standard 2 to one of those other ones, I acknowledge and understand, and I listened and heard you for why you have it at $1 million, but because it's not a guideline, it's really kind of a guess. I would at least like to know what the numbers are if you were to change standard 2.
Sure. May I speak to that, Tim?
Oh, yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, first I want to acknowledge that $1 million in this particular case is arbitrary. I believe it's responsible, but it's arbitrary. It's not tiable to a particular standard, either in the industry or, you know, some other kind of requirement. Having said that, Steve and Dan could cite examples better than I can of, you know, real life surprises. I don't remember exactly what that project cost out on Western Avenue, but it was hundreds of thousands of dollars, and those kinds of things happen. And that's why we want to be prepared for, you know, something really significant in this fund. So when you talk about possibly, you know, having $500,000 be the standard instead of $1 million, that scares me. But, you know, would 800,000 be reasonable? Would 900,000 be reasonable? Yeah, you know, there's no one specifically defined level of risk tolerance that we ought to have. It's the question actually for you as sewer commissioners, and we're just trying to provide you our best advice about it. There is one alternative that failed that $1 million test, that would pass the water test, and the low year in the balance of the entire fund was only was 975,133. That's overly precise, so I've been rounding numbers in most of this conversation. I think we should call this $975,000. You know, there are assumptions made here, and you know, each year we true up the actual performance of the year to the assumptions, and you know, that's why looking at the rates year by year is a good thing to do. But in any case, at $975,000, that's really close to $1 million. And what would yield that outcome, what is the rate adjustment that is predicted to yield that outcome, would still be 2s and 6s on the water side, but would be 2s and 1s instead of 2s and 2s on it would be, the first year would be 2 for sewer, and then 4 1s instead of 4 2s. And, you know, I looked on that and said, gosh, for, you know, 1% savings on the sewer side to start down that slippery slope of, you know, kind of paring away at what the standard was that we were trying to maintain. You know, it failed the test, so I recommended what I recommended to you. But it wouldn't be wrong for you as a governing body over this utility to say, yeah, 975, that's more or less adhering to the $1 million standard. And it means the sewer ratepayers will save a little bit of money during the term of the rate increases. That's not a wrong answer. It's just a less fiscally conservative approach. And I particularly as it relates to protecting ourselves against capital surprises in a community with old infrastructure, I will always be recommending to you that we take a conservative approach to funding the preparation for those surprises.
Thank you very much.
Liz.
I would like Steve's clarification on something that one of my esteemed sewer commissioners said. It's not, the way I see it, this water plant is not a choice between improvement at a certain cost. It's a choice between a new system, because the other one is well past its useful life and not, right? It's like the whole system needs to be replaced. We're not talking about improvements here. Is that correct?
That's correct. And as the board recalls, when we described the facility, you know, there is some savings there with the stainless steel filters that we purchased in '89 can be rebuilt. But other than that, the rest of the facility, the building, you know, has pretty much been condemned. So it needs to be replaced. And it's critical to meet the water standards. That the standards have changed a lot since 1989, and this will give us ability to, you know, to supply that safe drinking water.
Thank you.
And there's some compliance issues too, right?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Tim?
Oh, Peter.
Just at the risk of kicking a dog, I hope I don't regret. I feel like I didn't completely answer your question, Ian. I know I answered it in principle, but I only gave you one example. You asked me, you know, what would it look like if we went lower, right? And so the one other thing I want to say is every other test failure that I described was below 900,000. So the reason I cited that one is it's the only example of an alternative that we rejected because it failed the test, and it came really anywhere near the $1 million standard. So you'd have to lower that standard to something less than $900,000 for any of the other alternatives to pass the test.
Yeah, and so that is kind of what my question was, like which one of those tests would have passed if our standard had been lowered to $750,000 or $500,000. I realize I'm making you nervous with that, and I guess
so at $500,000 they all pass.
Yeah.
Well, the ones that fail on the water side don't, but the ones that failed that $1 million test all would pass a $500,000 test. The other numbers they range between $645,000 and $838,000. And I would venture to say I could use we, and it wouldn't be the royal we, but we, Steve and I, would urge you not to go as low as $838,000 in the fund balance, in the utility fund.
Still, you did invite the select board to come up with additional information on resources that we might need in making our decision. Just wanted to remind everybody this is a preliminary discussion, so we don't have to get to everybody feeling perfect. And so in that spirit, I don't want to drag it on too long, but I had what I think is a really simple question and an idea that might not be quite so simple, and you'll have to come back to us on. Can someone correct me if I'm wrong, but are the sewer rates based upon the water usage?
They are.
They are. Okay.
Yeah, there are nuances to that as it relates to the large industrial users that Steve could speak to better than I can. But for households and for most customers of the system, sewer rates are based on water usage.
And I just asked that because when you mentioned fairness between water and sewer, then I'm wondering how that kind of factors into that consideration. And I haven't really thought that through yet, but that might be just something for me to think about. And if you had any further comments the next time we talk about it. When I look, you kind of have me on the criteria and everything, and overall it's well thought out. But I just keep returning to that 26666, and given the fact, well, I know that I have a feeling we're going to come back to this. So we're going to come up with this 5-year plan, and it's likely we'll return to it. But I kind of also want to give it a good amount of thought, because what if we don't? What if the next select board has no interest in looking at it, or the 3 years from now select board, whoever that may be? So I'm kind of curious what would happen if, because 2% to me looks like, like a cost of living, a maintenance of the system, as you had a phrase for it. So I'm wondering if we front loaded it a little more and then made the impact over the years more palatable to ratepayers. For instance, something like a 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. Now, by my math numbers, which aren't very good usually, but you get to almost where you wanted to be within 5 years, but not quite. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there. That I thought throwing you the bone for a 3-year, because we can get people excited about the project. I understand that it's going to take a little pain to make it come to fruition. Maybe you could show us the numbers and give us feedback on how you're pleased or not pleased with that.
We certainly can run that. And would you do it alongside 2s in sewer? Is that your thought?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking. Just because we put people through the ringer on the sewer side recently.
Okay. Yeah,
unless
we'll be happy to run that.
I mean, I guess to make up, it's 24 versus 26 if you add up all of the yearly increases, but that's almost to the point where you want it, and I guess you could squeeze it out of sewer if you wanted to really get there.
And the other thing that goes on there, as you pointed out, is if you front end with a 3 instead of a 2, there's a compounding benefit to that, but that's certainly going to be muted by the 4 and the 5 that replace 2 6s. And so we'd be guessing. We'll run it through the system and we'll let you know the results.
Yeah. I mean, I think we also, as a board, have to kind of balance what we hope is going to be a pretty favorable bonding out and some discounts that we've discussed earlier. So, I mean, I'm trying to balance everything with, and I know on that side, you don't want to assume we're going to get something and then not have it not happen.
Yeah, but that's exactly the concern there, is if we take a more affordable approach now and then don't get the answers we hope we'll get to those questions a year from now, you might be in a situation, or the next board might be in a situation of actually needing to increase or allow the balance to fall too low, or, you know, precariously low. But there's no one right answer to these things, and we're happy to run this additional permutation on it and bring it back to you and show you what that looks like. Can I just make a quick comment about timing?
Oh, sure.
Appropriate time for that. So the ordinance needs to be adopted in June to be effective July 1st. So if you feel comfortable as a group that unless what Tim just described comes out, you know, preferable, that you'd be inclined to approve what we've recommended to you, then what I'd like to do is put first reading of the ordinance on for next Tuesday, and you could adjust the rates. So that won't bind you into it, but if you think you might be ready to either see a better outcome and embrace that, or go forward with 2s and 6s, then I'd like to put this ordinance on for first reading. If not, we don't have to. We still have some time to work with this over the next couple of weeks, but it would require a special meeting sometime during June, because having first reading on June 16th and the second reading in July wouldn't meet the deadline.
Okay, so there wouldn't be anything stopping us from, once we have those numbers plugged in, from tweaking it after the first reading, or during the first.
You could tweak it during the first reading and then adopt it a second time. You know, you don't vote on it on first reading, so you can modify it on first reading and make sure the public understands that's what's happening, and then adopt it 2 weeks later.
The other board members.
Could I get the water and sewer budget, or not water and sewer, the fund, what's been withdrawn from it for the last like 10 years for like basing the $1 million on?
Yes.
That question makes sense. I don't know if it's easy.
Sure. So I want to make sure we give you what you're asking for. So, you know, there's operating costs, of course, that have varied some, and they've varied for reasons related to controllable things, and then they've varied for reasons just related to, you know, changes in technology and efficiencies or inefficiencies in operations. So, but we could, I think if I'm understanding where you're coming from, you want to gauge the level of protection that the $1 million provides. So I think what you're more interested in than all the withdrawals, which would be operating and all the planned capital improvements, is more like what surprises have we encountered and of what magnitude. Is that fair?
As per usual, Peter, you phrased it much better. Thank you.
We'll do an analysis of that also and put that in the materials for next time.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I thought I was going to get out of this, and I just got a message. So I think I'm going to take public comment, and I have one person who has definitely raised her hand, and that's Kate O'Connor. You want to come up real quick? Kate, we're trying to go forward to parking.
Yeah, this is going to be just quick. I wanted to prove that I was still watching, but are you going to show like what the rates increase mean for like the average person? I know in the past you've had the numbers so that we can see what the increases mean over the years.
We'll do that. Daniel spoke to it and Steve did, but what we'll do is in the backup materials for next time, we'll actually take that average. I think Steve said it was 183 in Brattleboro. We'll take that and put these rate increases on it and show exactly what it would turn into. Absolutely.
Thanks, Liz. Kate, that's a good suggestion. Great. Well, and I don't see any phone participants right now. I'd really love it, unless anybody has a last question, I'd love to be able to just do our preliminary discussion of FY21 parking fund budget. So I don't know why I can't get this into my head. Do we need a vote to get out of water sewer?
No. Oh, well, to stop the
So,
water and
yeah.
sewer commissioners, yes. You don't need to vote on this on the matter, but you do need to adjourn as water and sewer commissioners.
All right. Who wants to make a motion?
So moved.
All right. Randy has moved to adjourn as water sewer commissioners. All those in favor, say aye.
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 And Daniel came in just in the nick of time to give us 5. I just on the edge of our seats. So at 9:26, understanding that we're all getting a little tired, I'd love to just open up a discussion about proposed fiscal year 21 parking fund budget, because, well, it's always, people always have opinions about parking. So I'd love to make the papers with this one. I don't know if we will. Go ahead, Peter.
All right. Once again, I'll just make brief introductory remarks. Patrick will join us, having spent most of his time the last few weeks as an extraordinary engineer of our meetings. He'll be the presenter of the parking fund budget here in a moment. What I wanted to underscore is the most unusual moment in time we find ourselves in the parking fund. So, I know you're all aware of it, but I just need to say that shutting it down was the right thing to do, but has also not taken our expenses to zero and has taken our revenues to zero. And we've been there since mid-March. So the numbers are in the materials that we've provided to you. We still do, because we also didn't proceed to implement capital improvements that had been approved for this fiscal year. We're saving that money. And so we're in a position where, we're going to end the year in the black. The fund will end the year in the black, but at a severe deficit for this fiscal year. And if we don't begin operating at near normal levels in the new fiscal year, we will run out of money in the fall. And the parking fund will go in the red, which means it becomes a burden to the general fund, which means all the taxpayers have to pick up the balance of it. So we wanted to make sure that as you look at the particular numbers we're proposing, which are really sort of bare minimum, just keep the operation functional numbers, that it presumes that we would begin operating by July 1st. We would begin doing parking enforcement and parking fee collection again by July 1st at the latest. And we think that's reasonable, alongside some other things that we're working on with the business community. We think that there's ways in which operating an effective parking enforcement system is actually beneficial to the businesses, and we would give up some parking revenue and some of the capacity of the system in some of the things we're working on that you'll be seeing as soon as next Tuesday night, regarding parklets and other ways in which we're trying to do things in collaboration with the business community as the recovery occurs. So we think there's some giving and taking here, and that rightly viewed, operating a parking system that requires people to pay and then enforces them being there for a limited period of time so that there's turnover of those spaces to benefit the proprietors at the various businesses. We think that this actually all is part of, working together with the downtown through the recovery, but it's important to have that July 1st date in your mind. All these numbers we're going to talk about related to the parking fund get worse if we wait longer than July 1st to reactivate parking. Patrick?
Okay, thank you, Peter. You did an excellent job summarizing the memo. I'll just go straight into the budget then. And the proposed fiscal 21 parking fund budget carries a revenue side of about $876,000. This is about $40,000 less than fiscal 20, and there are a couple of reasons for that. A couple of significant reasons for that. You'll notice that bond interest has dropped fairly dramatically by about $21,000. And this is one of those situations where, the Vermont Municipal Bond Bank refinances from time to time, and occasionally that provides us with real increases, and we've benefited greatly from that in other places. There are times when also the bond bank giveth and the bond bank taketh away. So in fiscal 21, we're down by about $21,000 in bond interest. We're projecting that parking meter revenue is going to be on the increase. That's going up by about $25,000. And we think this is really reflective of the public's ability to more easily manage their way through the parking system, right? So a couple of years ago, we installed new smart meters, and those smart meters provide a variety of methods for people to pay for parking, and they allow them to re-up their parking a little bit more easily. And we think all of that is actually a really good thing. It supports a more successful experience for the user. The flip side of that is we're writing fewer tickets, and so you'll notice that parking fines has dropped by about 45,000. And that's really a fair reflection of the fact that we're just penalizing people less, which is another way of saying they're having a more successful experience within the system. So on the whole, revenues are down by about $40,000. One of the things that I point out in the memo, and I think it's important for everyone at home and in here to understand, is that typically the parking fund has had a positive balance at the end of the year, meaning it brings in more revenue than it spends. And this enables the parking fund to be able to cover the cost of maintaining all of the parking fund assets. So that includes all the surface lots, all the meters, the transportation center, et cetera. The cost of maintaining those facilities is borne by the users within the fund, and that positive balance is necessary for us to have enough capital to be able to make capital improvements. So if we find ourselves in a future where the parking fund has a balanced budget each year, that may be cause for us to take a look at it in the future for opportunities to raise income, whether that be rates, possibly permit rates, whether that means perhaps establishing a minimum threshold for using a credit card. Some communities do that, not everybody. But just want to highlight for the board in this preliminary discussion, the need to have the parking fund actually generate revenue is what enables us to maintain the system in a manner which I think the public is appreciative of. I know we got a lot of positive feedback from the work we did in the Harmony parking lot a couple of years ago. So that positive balance is what enables us to be able to undertake those projects. Flipping over to the expense side, there's really not a whole lot going on here. Fiscal 20 had an expense side budget of $872,000. Fiscal 21 has an expense side budget of $875,000, so a couple of $1,000s more. Really talking about level expenses. There are obviously a couple of increases in salaries, but those are offset to a degree by health insurance. This is a very small pool of people, and one change in one household can have a fairly significant impact on the health insurance costs. So somebody going from a family plan to a single plan is helping to offset wage increases that are provided by means of the collective bargaining agreements that the board has approved. There's a slight increase in depreciation, and there's a slight increase in operating expenses having to do with the need to more frequently replace more expensive batteries with the new meters. But on the whole, the expenses are not quite level, but pretty close, 0.4%. And at this point, I would take any questions the board might have.
Thank you, Patrick. Great report. Brandy has her hand up. We're gonna dive right in.
Hi. I just first want to say that, Patrick, now that you're on the scene, Daniel has some rivalry because we were admiring Daniel's angles and roofing, and now that you're here, there's competition. So I don't know that I have a question. I just have a statement of, I think the regular citizen part of me had this fantasy of, free parking all the way through the Rona, mostly just because it's so easy just to come downtown and get out of your car, and everything else has been so not easy. But I think it's really important that we gently really show people the things we need to pay for. And, the thing that really comes to my mind from the memo is, needing to shore up the leaking in experienced goods and Dottie's. I mean, we sit here, we spend an hour and a half talking about how we want to be supportive to our downtown business community, and not having water leaking into their leased establishments is a great way to do that. And so I think, as much as I, as a regular Brattleboroian, would love to just go downtown and park, I think it's important that we really talk about the things that this fund pays for, and how it really needs to be self-sustaining.
Yeah, thank you, Brandy. And well, I'm wanting to point out that we've already had some complaints and issues about the Wild West of parking that we have right now already downtown. And if things ramp up even more in the next couple of weeks, those conditions where somebody is just parking in one spot all day with no regulation is gonna, it's gonna be even worse for some of the merchants who would like people to be able to park near their establishment. So anyway, the July 1st projection is certainly a reasonable one. You could even argue if the governor starts ramping things up more quickly, you could argue that we should kick it off before then, but it's always a balance. Anyone else with, oh, I had a couple of comments, but obviously I made one on. Who else has a comment or question for Patrick or Peter?
Just a quick question. What is depreciation? I don't really understand.
Either you or me.
I'll do that. So Patrick and I aren't going to be able to tell you exactly how it's calculated. It's a number that we get from the finance department when we're putting the budget together. But what it represents is the diminishing value of our assets. So after we've made a substantial investment in our capital improvements, our depreciation number increases and then will decrease over time, because when it's new and we've just invested in it, it loses value fast. And then eventually it loses all its value and it's just an old piece of infrastructure until the next time we invest in it again. So when enough of that has happened, depreciation might stay really low for a while. This is a fund where we've actually done a fair amount of investment, especially in the meters and the kiosks, but also in the Harmony lot, as Patrick mentioned, over in the Harris lot. The last 4 or 5 years has been a period of time when we have done some freshening up of some of the facilities that had gotten really old and potholed and needed some attention. And so depreciation has increased during this time because of that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Daniel?
I feel like this is a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I can't help myself. Like, does the parking fund have to be the parking fund? Couldn't the cost of running parking in Brattleboro just be part of the general fund? Does it have to be run like a business? And I was thinking about it from like an equity point of view, and I was like, well, I never go to the Gibson Aiken Center. I never use the rink, and I don't complain about it because it's just those are things we have in the town, and we have parking and parking structures and parking infrastructure. Does it have to be a fund like this?
It does not. It is in other communities operate it in different ways, including as just a department of the general fund. There are places where it operates as a department of the general fund.
I mean, I guess why I was asking was because I was hearing, you know, we're in a position where we need it to make money. Otherwise, it's going to be a drag on the general fund. And I'm also well aware that, like, you know, from a kind of habits point of view, if we say parking is free in Brattleboro forever, that, yeah, we won't get the turnover and it'll be a problem for people. And I don't know. I just wanted to voice it and hear somebody sensibly talk me down.
May I speak to that, even though it's 9:41? So there's no one right answer to actually either of those, but especially not to the enterprise fund question, right? So it's a good practical way to run something like this that does have a fee structure established as part of it, to run it like a little business and keep it solvent. It's a common practice and it's a good practice when you can do it. There aren't a lot of our operations in local government lend themselves well to that. And so that's why we only have two in Brattleboro: the utility operation, which is very commonly, almost always on its own as a utility fund. I mean, sorry, as an enterprise fund, and parking, which is commonly done that way. But if you were to decide as a policy matter with broad perspective for what's best for the community, that running parking as a department and allowing it to be partially subsidized by general fund revenues is more appropriate. There is absolutely nothing at all wrong with that. The decision to, as Tim referred to it, the Wild West, to allow parking in the downtown area to be controlled by human behavior rather than by as a fee and enforcement structure, I think is a really fundamentally different question. So even if you decided that philosophically you wanted this to be part of the general fund because it's part of the shared operation of all that we do, and it's okay for some people to be paying into the parking fund who aren't using it as much as others because of exactly like what you said about other functions of town government. If you decided that that was the appropriate way to go, we would still strongly recommend that we operate more or less as we do today. It's a well-run operation. You know, we have a small amount of employees who work effectively together to, you know, keep the system operational and to enforce the rules. And that's not always the most popular job in town. And, you know, they do a good job. They do it in all kinds of weather all year long. And the benefits to the community of having good parking enforcement are both financial and quality of life in the downtown.
Thanks.
I'm a strong believer in user fees. I like how, you know, the water and sewer users pay for the water and sewer, and the people who park pay for their parking, and it all shouldn't be on the taxpayer. The property tax.
Thank you, Liz. And if no one has anything else, I wanted to leave on a couple of positive notes. I have asked if anyone has public questions, just chime in on the chat. I want to remind everybody that we really, I think, did a very good job of being very responsive to not only the downtown merchants, but everybody in, you know, who operates downtown, works, lives in the smart meter upgrades. Overall, I mean, the response to our actions there have been highly positive. And I think the happiness level has gone up substantially because of those actions. And as Peter and Patrick pointed out, the revenue has gone down, but it's one of those revenues going down that we can be happy about. Similar in my mind to composting. You know, it's we keep having to transfer those funds to the waste bags because it is such a successful program. And so the other piece of good news that I wanted to mention in the revenue dropping almost in half. If I'm looking at the actuals, FY18, FY19, the parking boot income has almost halved. So if you recall, just about a year ago, maybe there was quite a bit of buzz about how terrible the boots were, and they are terrible to be, from both perspectives, to be putting on people. It's not great PR. So in the new budget, it's been cut in half for the parking boot income, and you know, I think that's a good thing too. So I think we're making us a necessary evil less evil by we're dialing in good things for people who use the parking system. That's my feel-good comments for today. Anybody have any closing comments? No. It's very funny on this end because I often get like, it feels like I get stares instead of voices. But, so I always want to turn up my volume to see if I'm hearing anything wrong. Well, no one has anything else to close out our meeting with? Thanks, everybody. Does anybody else have anything to say that might lead us to the end of the meeting?
Go and enjoy a cool beverage and some fresh air.
Liz?
I move to adjourn.
Oh, that's a good idea.
You need them to water. Liz has made a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks,
Good night,
everybody.
everybody.